This started as a shorter project. Jesus. It started as a much shorter project. Scope creep, man. When I started this, it was going to lay out an alternative theory for some events in Gridman Universe, from the commonly accepted wisdom. The movie generally avoids explaining things, and on the few occasions it does, there's some reasons to mistrust those explanations. But while I was watching another YouTube video essay, I recognized that that project was going to be too small, too narrow, and ultimately too suspect in its motives. The good news is that all of that project's DNA is going to remain in this video. This is, after all, a deep dive into Gridman Universe, by me, which means my view on it is still going to be there. But that's just part of it. I realized that to construct that theory, I first had to construct some of the underpinnings of how I read Dinah Zenon's world, then how I read Gridman's sense of ethics, the actual principles, not the identically named voice trauma. And those underpinnings necessitated context, and, well...
If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe.
So to talk about Gridman Universe, I must first, therefore, invent Gridman Universe. Whew, okay. So before we proceed, this video has spoilers for everything I'm putting on your screen right now. All of that. Yeah, really. I'm begging you to trust me here. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Before we get into it, though, I am going to lead with, I don't really like this movie. You might not. I don't have beef with you if you... Well, okay,
Yeah. Well, that's Australian and highly contextual.
What I am going to promise you is that I'm not going to dump on it just for the sake of dumping on it. And I'm not going to dump on you if you like it. If I have something bad to say about a scene, it's because I think even on the movie's own terms, it's a confuser. I'm not here to kill the movie. I'm here because I love Gridman, and statistically, you're here because the algorithm says you like multi-hour video essays about anime, but you probably also love Gridman. If you do want to see me dump on the movie, you can follow me on Twitter and get in my DMs. I can talk about some stuff. I'm holding back a fair bit, but I am going to point out where things feel jank to me. If you see that as the same thing as mindlessly dumping on it, we might have some friction here, but again, please trust me. I don't think any piece of art, even pieces of art that I think are really good, like the original Gridman, are above criticism. Criticism is about making future work better and enhancing our understanding of the text in front of us. When you criticize art in good faith, it's not just for the sake of destroying it, it's for the sake of pointing out places where it fell short and how you could avoid those pitfalls. So if we can agree on that, if we can agree that criticism is ultimately a constructive act and not a destructive act, despite the cavalcade of videos on YouTube dedicated to exactly that, let's start with a little background. In 2018, Studio Trigger and Tsuburaya Productions released SSSS Gridman. The SSSS is silent unless you're trying really hard, so to make this video at all watchable and the text at all speakable, I'm going to call it 2018 when I'm referring to it most of the time. As a reboot/sequel to 1993's Denko Chojin Gridman, also known as Gridman the Hyper Agent, Gridman follows the stories of three teenagers, Yuta Hibiki, an everyman protagonist boy described by his friend as, I don't know, normal, I guess, who serves as the partner of the titular giant hero Gridman. Rika Takarada, a slightly moody, acerbic young lady who has an intimate relationship with the girl who turns out to be the show's victimized antagonist, and Sho Utsumi, a tokusatsu nerd who's just a little too excited to be living out the plot of an Ultraman show. The three of them form the Gridman Alliance, try to save Tsutsuji-dai, their neighborhood in Tokyo's Narima Ward, kind of, from kaiju, and try to find the truth behind the mysterious kaiju attacks. Yuta Hibiki serves as our lead, the partner and host of the giant hero from another world, Gridman. Except it kinda doesn't. As the show goes on, it becomes more apparent that the apparent antagonist, Akane Shinjo, is closer to main character status than any of the members of the Gridman Alliance, a traumatized young girl from another world being exploited by an evil alien to make kaiju. She's also the creator of the world in which the Gridman Alliance lives, though despite creating it, she has no control over it save through the violence that she enacts through kaiju. Moreover, Yuta Hibiki isn't really Yuta Hibiki. That same alien who is exploiting Akane Shinjo attacked Gridman, sundering him to pieces and forcing his main consciousness to take refuge in the body of a teenage boy. The team's mission now becomes clear: to reach out to Akane Shinjo and show her traumatized heart that a friend is the strongest weapon a person can have. It's not an accident that Gridman starts the series isolated and amnesiac in an unfamiliar context. This is a lesson he also needs to learn in order to save her. The 4 S's in the title prove themselves to be not just a nod to Gridman's Western adaptation, Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, but the mission statement of Gridman and indeed of the show: special signature to save a soul. Even imperfect people deserve your kindness, and no matter who you are, a friend will always be your salvation. Hey, I'm on an editing pass here. After having 3 very stupid Twitter arguments just in the short span of time between finishing the script and editing it, I've decided not to have one in the comments of this video essay. I'm not an adherent to the Rika reflects the real Akane theory. I don't buy it. There's virtually no support for it other than the line that translates as "you'll always be with me" much better than "you'll always be like me." Moreover, most of the symbols attached to the introduction of that concept in 1993 Gridman are attached to Yuta and not Rika in this show. This is a very popular fan theory with several holes, not a stated fact. I will not engage it once this sidebar is done because I feel it undermines the actual core theme of connection. If all the connecting Akane does is with herself and the "like me" translation is correct, the show's thesis of "you are not alone whenever forever" does not make any sense. Do not try to convince me this theory is the only interpretation of the show in the comments. I will delete them. 3 years later, Studio Trigger and Tsuburaya Productions take a second crack at the themes of Gridman with Dynazenon. Again, the 4 S's are silent. With many locations simply palette-swapped versions of Gridman's Tsutsujidai, Dynazenon follows the 4 pilots of the combining anti-kaiju mecha Dynazenon. Yomogi Yasunaka, a boy struggling with his parents' divorce and his mother's impending remarriage who wants to secure his personal freedom. Yume Minami, a girl who's developed promise-breaking disorder after losing her sister to a possible suicide. Koyomi Yamanaka, a 30-something NEET who gave up on the world after running away from a girl and an enormous stash of cash in high school, and now mostly hangs out with his middle school-aged cousin. And Gauma, a resurrected Chinese mummy from 5,000 years ago, searching for his lover in the present era. The 4 of them fight against kaiju used by the kaiju eugenicists, Gauma's former comrades, for whom kaiju mean freedom. To make the connection between Dynazenon and Gridman more obvious, Gridman IP holder Tsuburaya mandated the addition of the words Gridman Universe to the Dynazenon logo. Following on from the ideas and concepts in Gridman while running with themes and motifs previously seen in Tsuburaya's Ultraman Max and Ultraman Mebius, Dynazenon flips the script and converts on the idea that everyone can be a hero so long as they have a friend. The 4 S's in Dynazenon are not Gridman's special signature to save a soul, but their own proof of the idea: scarred souls shine like stars. Sharing a lot of concepts and a couple of characters, it seemed inevitable that Gridman and Dynazenon would eventually have a formal crossover. The ending of Dynazenon saw a teaser for Gridman Cross Dynazenon, a future project whose status remained up in the air for a little over a year. The following autumn, however, a teaser image released with a new yet familiar title: Gridman Universe. Sure enough, Gridman Universe sees the casts of Gridman and Dynazenon return for one big bash. It's a movie that plays to Studio Trigger and Tsuburaya Productions' biggest strengths, while seeking to dole out bucketful after bucketful of fan service. Closure for everything left unclosed in Gridman and Dynazenon. Well, let's get started. Here we go. Gridman Universe. Whose fiction is this? The movie opens by reminding us that the story, including its names and places, are fictional, with a ton of CRT artifacting on those words. We also get a different version of the Studio Trigger logo with an eye inside it. So, keep those things in mind. I'm gonna talk about them later. But if I fire this gun now, we're never going to even start agreeing on what's happening in the movie. If you let me talk about this now, I'll never shut up. And if you let me start talking about themes and metatext before we even agree on text,
You go to hell before you die.
We open on Yuta drawing Gridman, someone he's never met. Though it's not mentioned out loud, the way he draws Gridman is the way that Gridman himself, in Yuta's body, drew Gridman in 2018 Gridman. We're in the literal first real shot of the movie, and something weird is already happening. Meanwhile, he and Utsumi talk about how he plans to confess to Rika. Utsumi points out that he's missed the timing, presumably because Gridman already said that, but Yuta wants to do it anyway. Utsumi gives him the best advice he's got. They talk about how repeatedly drawing and erasing on the same paper will destroy it. And we're off to the races. From a structural perspective, this scene is really good. If every scene had this level of clarity, this would be a pretty good movie. We have our core theme introduced to us in the way the protagonist has to engage with. Expressing your feelings is good. It has a challenge issue. What if expressing your feelings doesn't matter? And gives us our answer. Do it anyway, dude. It reintroduces the themes of creation and destruction as a cycle that can ultimately destroy stuff from 2018. Akane repeatedly destroying and recreating her city, ultimately destructive to her heart. Yuta repeatedly erasing and redrawing Gridman, ultimately destructive to the paper. Endless destruction and creation, ultimately destroying something in a way that's outside the scope. Again, this is a pretty good start. It's handling multiple threads at once. It could go interesting places with a lot of them. Yuta has been cast as someone in some senses similar to Akane. He's also isolated by being someone who doesn't remember Gridman, despite being the one most affected by Gridman passing through his world. He's trying to find his place in the world, and the way he thinks he can do that is by confessing to Rika. Whether and how many of these ideas it converts on, though, is still an open question. So let's see what it's going to do with them. Yuta goes to get tickets to a play about a hacker who uses the use of his legs after an accident and refuses to do physical therapy because he's scared. How do I know the play is about this without seeing it yet? Anyway, while he's picking up those tickets, an over-designed mob character stares at him really, really hard. This girl right here, her? That's Layla Misakiyama, also sometimes written as Mimika Misakiyama. She shares her surname with Reiko Misakiyama, the hot cop from 1993 Gridman. Layla was meant to occupy the Akane-like tragic sub-antagonist role in earlier drafts of Gridman Universe, according to information we got during Trigger Night 14. In some drafts, she was Yomugi's stepsister. This kind of implies that Dynazenon was probably intended to be set in the real world, and not the utterly wild thing we're gonna find out later in this movie, given her surname. In another, she was Yuta's middle school junior with a kind of yandere crush on him. There were some other minor striations in this character concept, but those are the two big concepts that we started with. She was an idol, but no one on the writing crew had that much depth of knowledge about the idol industry. Getting a movie going with a new character who is a challenge in that way and still highlighting all the old characters ended up being a bit much, so those drafts were thrown out, and a rule came in that the movie would focus on existing cast, so out Layla went. She's still here, though, haunting the narrative as a possibility from a world that never was. Playing Spot the Layla is a fun game that all can enjoy, so I've included a Let's Play of it in this video. Anyway, he goes downstairs and finds some girls gossiping about Rika going to a university student's apartment at night. They think she has a boyfriend. Yuta's soul understandably leaves his body. Mine does too, but for different reasons. I gotta comment on this whole subplot before we keep going, before we even get into that subplot. This thing was pretty common as a bit for both Naoto and Takeshi in 1993. Seeing Yuka doing something that looks like NTRing the boys, but is just an innocent, secret other thing is, like, weirdly common in this franchise's DNA. I'm gonna count this as a reference, but I'm only gonna count it once as, like, a vibes-based category reference that's too specific to just be a theme of the show. 2018 did also do this kind of bit a little bit. It's different here, though, because everyone is misreading the situation. Rika's here for Akane. Gridman as Yuta doesn't understand that and thinks she's here to date these 22-year-olds. These 22-year-olds also think Rika is here to date them. This is only implied, but specifically they think this is a JK business situation. For the uninitiated, JK business is the broader term that's kind of functionally replaced compensated dating. The idea is that high schoolers spend time with older guys for money. Rika, a high school girl who dresses pretty unassumingly, but has really nice hair and really nice shoes, does kind of fit the stereotype. In 2018, the scene is doing a lot of heavy lifting that I think is kind of lost on most of the Western audience. We learn that Gridman is sort of naive to stuff that faces high school girls. We learn that Rika is willing to save people who kinda suck. It's a moment about how your presentation can misdirect, something that later comes back for Gridman when he finds out that he's been misled by his own presentation. I think Gridman's naivete to this sort of thing is actually pretty load-bearing to him as a character. Gridman isn't human, he experiences humanity through his contact with it. Gridman doesn't understand humanity, but he comes to understand friendship. Gridman completely misses all this kind of messy stuff. He's a little bit not above that, but beyond that. An anime about, traumatized NEETs, school desistance, and reasons someone might call the cops on an adult man for hanging out with a teenage girl would probably be beyond his understanding of humanity to create. He completely missed all this subtext and assumed that Rika was just into older guys. Why would Gridman be making an anime? Yuta vividly dissociates about that feel when no GF and gets hit in the face with a volleyball, marking the second time our story has started with a volleyball impact. After saying it doesn't hurt, he goes to the nurse's office. The movie acknowledges gay people exist, which it will not do again. He asks Rika to go to the stage play with him under the pretext of helping with the play that Rika's class is writing, and she fobs him off to Utsumi, which I would also do in that situation. Cut to the junk shop where they summarize 2018. Yuta's response is basically, haha, that's wild. He does say he likes how they portrayed Akane, which makes Rika happy because that's the only thing she wants to get across. We find out that Utsumi and Rika are the only ones who remember the events of 2018. No one else in their class does. No one else in Tsujidai does. No one else in the world seems to, which gives us Rika's motivation for this movie. Trying to make her feelings for Akane understood in a world that forgot Akane after Akane left the material world. So again, we're here in this themes corner. Rika's mom shows up, we get some shots of things in the junk shop. Utsumi talks about needing to focus on cool fights in the play. The computer used to summon Gridman, known as Junk, is gone, but all this lowercase j junk from random episodes of 1993 is here in the junk shop. I'm going to point out that I feel this counter is itself something really weird. We are currently at a pace of references to 1993 Gridman exceeding 1 per minute. And I feel like this is where the movie is starting to swim directly against 2018. Like, okay, 2018 ends on the idea that Tsuburaya is not a closed world. Akane has opened her heart and expanded her world. She is capable of facing a broader world than this little world she has created. She leaves the computer world city for her reality. Tsuburaya's closed loop is replaced with a whole wide world. It feels here like we have the opposite. The metatextual world of the film isn't getting bigger. If anything, it's getting smaller. Yuta's feelings for Rika are a thing we knew from the end of 2018. Utsumi being the cool fights guy is a regression from him, regretting being the cool fights guy for the last couple episodes of 2018. We are making references to a 1993 tokusatsu show faster than a human could contextualize them. Just watch the counter. I swear I'm not making the counter to show off how much 1993 I know, even though, I love this show, and I do want you to know how much I love it. Utsumi offers to show Yuta an Ultra Series stage show. Kind of. There's more weirdness here, plus Utsumi's high-tech space pillow that brings us to... The cover is meant to evoke the Ultra Heroes Expo DVD covers, but it studiously avoids saying the word Ultra. The cast chosen is interesting too, because some of these characters are really obscure deep cuts by Ultraman standards. But they're all voiced by Gridman voice actors. Again, there's nothing outside the city.
I told you, outside the city there's nothing.
Giving as good as he gets, Yuta, who doesn't get the Ultraman thing at all, drags Utsumi to Lonely Sneaker. He cries about the sad hacker kid, marking him as allegedly the guy who understands the human drama stuff, unlike Utsumi, who understands the kaiju hero battle stuff. Sort of this yin and yang of story understander energy. While they're walking home, they find out what Rika was so busy with. Going to some 20-year-old's apartment. He looks like the exact average of Yuka's brother from 1993 Gridman and adult Takeshi from Boys Invent Great Hero. Yuta and Utsumi see this and freak out. There's a little comedy here. I think between this and the difference of reaction that Yuta and Utsumi have to their respective stage show choices, we can add a new theme to the themes. Misinterpretation. Yuta sees a ghost and freaks out again, and then we cut to stuff that they're talking about the next day until we get this movie's first kaiju attack. Oh, Layla's here again. Love to see that. The bus that gets kicked over by the kaiju is headed to Sakuragaoka, the setting of 1993 Gridman. Yuta hears Gridman in his head. Yuta asks Utsumi if he's the main character in the play script, and then runs off to Jungshabaya. As he sprints there, he almost dies, and then gets saved by the Neon Genesis Junior High students. After 5 years of waiting, we finally see Vit use his Dark Souls crossbow. For a second, this movie seems like it might whip ass again. Speaking of ass, Rika and Utsumi are oriented opposite ways on Caliber when he shows up carrying both of them, so that half the frame can be devoted to schoolgirl ass. This sort of thing was mostly absent from Dynazenon, and while it certainly existed, never quite this combination of flagrant and for no reason in Gridman, even in the swimsuit episodes. So, permit me a second to just kind of go, ugh. I'm not one to kink shame in a genre substantially owed to Go Nagai so much he thought he was dying and going, if I'm going to shit myself to death, I at least need to draw a bunch of anime asses first. But I do think this kind of fan service is lowest common denominator stuff. I don't think it's morally evil. I don't want the dream police to come send you to horny jail if you like it. Trust me, I write fan service stuff. I get it. I just think, basically, if you want to get me horny, just do it. This sort of plausibly, deniably horny in the middle of an allegedly serious work stuff, it makes me feel like you, the creator of the work, are afraid that you don't have the sauce. I'm not some schoolmarm looking for bra straps to tut-tut at. I just think you should earnestly believe in your story and not feel like you need to bribe me, like I'm a cat hiding under your bed, and you want me to get in the narrative carrier, so you go, I've got schoolgirl ass. Respect me as a reader / viewer, and respect yourself as a creator. Please. We finally get to the junk shop, and Junk is back. Gridman shows up on Junk and asks Yuta if he's willing to fight with him again, explains that the world is falling out of balance, and they go for it. Gridman turns into his 2018 form because it suits Yuta best, and we're off to the first kaiju fight. Here's some fun kaiju trivia. This guy, De Morgan, has the kanji for Amemiya, Gridman's director, on his back. If you invert his coloration, he looks like Gridman's initial fighter form. Two of the later kaiju, Damgiren and Mad Origin, also work like this, inverting to Primal Fighter and Full Powered, respectively. This fight's decent. Gridman gets his ass beat a bit because it's new to Yuta again. Then Dynarex shows up and they say he's the new guy, and together they team up and beat the kaiju's ass, fulfilling the promise of Gridman cross Dynazenon. Woo! Yeah! Gridman can do Fixer Beam Primal Fighter form now by rotating his chest panels a little bit. The city is fine again. We're now at the 22-minute mark of the movie, about a sixth of the way through. I think it's fair to call this the end of the intro, or maybe you can argue that comes after the next couple scenes, but like whatever, let's take a sec to recap. We've introduced our themes, creation and destruction in the same space, and expressing yourself regardless of how it's taken. We have our cast, the Gridman cast, and Dynarex, who seems like he might be Gauma. We have our plot, there's kaiju, the world's out of balance, there's a new mystery. We have our B-plot, the stage play, and the C-plot, Yuta wanting to ask Rika out. There's some contention about whether this development for Gauma makes sense within the fanbase. I saw the ending of Dynazenon, and I immediately assumed that this is exactly what happened. Him taking up with Gridman instead of Grid Knight is a little weird to me, but sure. The visual storytelling was obvious to me though, so I'm not mad at this. I can see where this would upset people who didn't twig to it. It's fine though. It might be a little weird if he were less permanently changed by the experience, such as by having an identical human body that he can just go about his human-sized business in, but this isn't that weird to me. Overall, I think we're at a C. There are some good things here. We've got very clearly articulated themes. We have a pretty decent kaiju fight. We have our A, B, and C plots perfectly laid out. The C plot is a little janky and maybe a little weird in how it's being executed so far. But whatever, lots of good movies start as C's. So, we're fine. It's fine. Back at base, Yuta kinda bags on himself, and everyone tries to big him up anyway. Then Gauma shoots out of the screen and basically tackles him with his recognizable human form. Oh, so now he isn't irreparably changed by his experience in Dynazenon, he's just also able to turn into a robot dinosaur now. This still isn't a deal breaker for me. I know I just said I would feel it was weird if this happened, but he's a Neon Genesis Junior High student and he's now calling himself Rex. So there's at least some through line of having been changed by his experiences. The way he relates to the world is now different. For an instant, it looks like he might commit the yaoi to Yuta, but really he just wants to know who this kid is. Before he too starts talking Yuta up and talking about how Gridman needs Yuta to be able to fight and use the Fixer Beam. Gridman hasn't really ever needed a specific host for that, so let's put a pin in that one too. There's some back and forth about why there are kaiju if Akane is not here. Then we cut to Yuta and Utsumi talking about Rika seeming worried, and Utsumi not being worried. Again, we get the sense of Yuta as someone who's trying to figure out his place in the world here. If being Gridman is something only he can do, he'll do it. It has meaning to him because it's something that tells him who he is in relation to the world around him. But I want to drill in on Utsumi's comment on Rika. I'm not an expert or anything, but if I wanted to have a character express their worries, like, I'd maybe have them do it themselves on camera. If the problem is that Rika is bad at expressing herself to other people, why not have her express it to herself? This is a device we've used before in 2018. Rika has too big of a feeling of relief to be normal about it, so she leaves the room and expresses it out of view of everyone else instead. She blushes, she gets very blushy when she's embarrassed consistently. She does this with Akane, with Naked Auntie, with Gridman, etc. She runs off to have that embarrassment somewhere else, but this way we get to see her occupy that feeling, depicting her emotional landscape as something the camera values in 2018. Here it is starting to feel like having Rika demonstrate her own emotions to the camera, not even to other people, just to the viewer, is kind of beyond this movie. I'd call this inexplicable weird stuff, but it's not really that weird, just what? Anyway, Utsumi ribs Yuta about how he looks forward to how Yuta will look when he gets shot down. Yuta immediately starts crying until Utsumi says he was just joking, which, like, if you're this fragile about it, I kind of have real concerns about how you'd behave with an actual human being as your partner and not the idea you have in your head. But I'm not going to dwell on this part further for now. I don't want to bore you with me hating it, but yeah, no, this is really uncomfortable and immature to watch. Cut to Rika looking stunned at the idea that the Neon Genesis Junior High students are going to be staying with them. Her mother encourages her on this point by pointing out that her brother's room is now free. I know a second ago I was requesting more Rika content, but in this alleged Rika focus scene, she has one line with words in it. Her mother, who is barely a character, speaks more. But more importantly, this doesn't make any sense. Rika's characterization is kind of a tire fire in this movie. Like, Rika standing there in stunned mild dismay about having some people in her house in a crisis is, did we watch the same 2018? Did I get Mandela affected into having watched a better show? In 2018, we have a scene midway through the show with Rika and Auntie. Rika keeps encountering this stinky, neglected, homeless middle schooler and notices that, well, he's stinky and neglected and homeless. Her response is to, with some difficulty, sneak the homeless middle schooler into her house in a culture where homeless people are stigmatized as dangerous and lazy, give him a bath, and ask him some probing questions to try to figure out if there's help he needs that she can give. This act of kindness becomes so foundational to Auntie, he turns around and applies it to Akane at the show's climax at his own personal physical expense. Rika here is just mutely, mildly upset that her house is hosting people in a crisis. Sure. Now, like characters aren't real people, they have no inner life beyond that which they're assigned, and they deliver lines according to the script. But one of the first building blocks of good writing is don't treat a character as a pawn. Characters should exist for themselves. They should have consistency, or when they have inconsistency, it should highlight something about that illusory inner life that maybe we wouldn't think about. Even writers who don't agree with this rule uncritically usually think there's something to it. At a GDC talk in 2015, Kazutaka Kodaka, writer of Danganronpa and Raincoat, among other things, said that while he doesn't entirely agree with this tip, at the very least you don't want it to look like you're using a character as a pawn. If the character exists solely to get in position to enable something for the audience, and that character's internal logic starts to fall apart, the part of the audience that is attached to that character finds itself adrift. In my personal philosophy as a writer, I think of these as, like I said, attachment points. People come to your story looking for something or someone to attach to, whether it's a cool robot design or a compelling character or an interesting setting. If someone's attachment point starts to lose internal consistency or feel like a pawn, it stops being an attachment point because the elements aren't attached. If your very tank-like piece of military hardware suddenly spawns superpowers where the pilot can shoot people with mind bullets, if you haven't laid the groundwork for that, I'm lost if I thought the tank was cool. If we've spent 8 hours of gameplay establishing a really intimate setting, and then you go, actually, we're going to spend the rest of this game traversing a series of perfectly gray office buildings, you might lose me. I'm not instantly in free fall, but if something else changes my understanding of the situation, and I don't have that attachment point to keep myself anchored, suddenly as a reader, I'm detached from your story. Whether that detachment takes the form of annoyance, upset, or boredom depends on a ton of factors, but upset, bored, and annoyed are not words you want me to use to describe my feelings if you aren't actively trying to alienate the reader as a narrative device. You ever play Wolfenstein? Wolfenstein The New Order and its expandalone, The Old Blood, is a 2014 game that resurrects the Wolfenstein franchise of shooters. Where the older Wolfenstein games were schlocky, campy, shoot Nazis for fun games, The New Order takes a more serious cinematic tone. For every stomp through a German moon base, there's an unarmed slog through a concentration camp. For every extremely cool fight with a giant robot, there's a conversation between an Aryan-passing Polish-American Jewish guy and an African-American man implied to be Jimi Hendrix about whether America was fascist before the Nazis ever got there.
You don't get it, do you? Before all this, before the Germans, before the war, back home, man, you were the Nazis.
Even the fight with the giant robot has some pathos attached. This is a game that expects me to stop between bosses to have a good cry about killing a boss named Machine Man that's a 10-foot tall robot with Gatling guns, and it is right to do so. This game kicks ass. This is like one of the first non-mobile games I played after losing the ability to enjoy media for a long time, and it whips. The reason I like it is mostly that high contrast between the high-resolution horror and the kind of schlocky stuff. It also feels really good as a boomer shooter with a lot of responsive, high-intensity gunplay. So naturally I, going through the franchise years post-facto, moved on to Wolfenstein The New Colossus. The New Colossus is different. Characters generally look younger, smoother, more cartoony. The film grain effect is gone. Truly grotesque designs get sanded down. The schlocky stuff gets louder. Here is decrepit Hitler pissing blood into a bucket. Go to Venus to see Hitler pissing blood into a bucket. And the more subdued stuff starts to get interrupted by either really campy stuff or stuff like your girlfriend calling to tell you she has the pregnant horny.
Don't know if this is normal, but I think the pregnancy is making me a little, excited.
The UI is less stark, and while it has a little era-appropriate flavor in the form of projector artifacts, it starts to have that Ubisoft game UI feel to it. The guns have a lot more options, but none of them feel great unless you play the game a very specific way. We get different weapon dual wielding, which is new, but in exchange, each gun's identity feels a little weaker, and there are a lot more options that feel either bad or too specific to be interesting. If you really enjoyed how tight the gunplay was in the New Order, and how every gun had a solid mix of general applications and specific applications, the new options are going to feel like a mess. This game was, fine, but outside of a couple of moments, it never really hit the heights of New Order or even Old Blood for me. My attachment points weren't gone, but something wasn't passing the smell test. While I was playing it, it took me a little while to figure out why the game just felt worse. Enter Youngblood. Youngblood takes place a couple decades after the previous game. Instead of B.J. Blazkowicz, Nazi killer, you play one of his daughters, both of whom behave like they're in a Bill and Ted movie. They're constantly goofing on each other. There's a mechanic for throwing each other rock-on hand gestures. It feels so 80s that it forgot to feel Wolfenstein. There are a lot of design choices I find interesting here, But where the previous two games were boomer shooters, these feel more modern in a kind of derogatory sense. There's a pretty good chance shooting someone in the head doesn't kill them. Enemies have different health and shield types. Every enemy has a big health bar above their head. It's designed around co-op, so the stealth elements of the previous 2.5 games are mostly gone unless you invest in an upgrade that makes you essentially invisible. The plot also has nothing going for it, in large part because it barely exists. Going beyond the New Colossus, where you had plot events to do in order, but could revisit areas for certain submissions, now there is no order of events to the game. Go into these labs in whatever order you want. Go into the Super Double Lab, have encounters, win. I thought this game was like a solid D+. Not because it wasn't a technically competent game, but because the pieces didn't connect to make a Wolfenstein. Did I finish it? Yes. I'm very stupid, and I like to talk about stuff I didn't like on the internet, even if I try to find ways to be constructive about it. Did I enjoy it? Sometimes being in a skin-tight suit skill-gapping Nazis is gender euphoria. But outside of a couple scenes at the very end, the narrative weight was just about gone, and the gunplay wasn't as good, so virtually all of the attachment points that I had started with in The New Order were gone. I don't really remember anything about Youngblood as a gameplay experience or as a story, whereas I could talk your ear off about even the New Colossus' decisions. It's not that I hated the game. Once I got into the rhythm of playing it, it was fine. But because my attachment points were all off, there's nothing that really stuck in my mind. Anyway, Rika hasn't said anything in this movie that feels like it's specifically something only Rika could say, even after finally getting a scene away from Yuta and Utsumi. The only way I can find something interesting to say about my second favorite in the characters franchise's first focus scene in the crossover movie is to go on a 1,000-word digression about Wolfenstein. Okay, we're back. Right, the cable network in the news report on the kaiju was a reference to where Naoto's dad works in 1993 Gridman. So... okay, Yuta takes a bath and there's a ghost again. We cut to the next day where he tells Utsumi about it, and then we're talking about the stage play again. Namiko and Haas, Rika's friends, are rewriting it because it's unrealistic, which I wasn't aware was a criteria. We were assessing a school play with kaiju attacks on, and that's how we officially find out that everyone is once again forgetting the kaiju attacks, just like in my hit 2018 anime SSSS Gridman. Utsumi explains that Fixer Beam fixed the city, and that part does seem to hit for Namiko and Haas, enough that it ends the discussion. Rika has one line without someone talking over her. For someone who's supposed to be passionate about her vision for the script, a vision of a person she cares deeply about, she's barely participating here. Eagle-eyed viewers spot Ako and Maru-san, Akane's friends from 2018, who are even less present in this movie, but are present in a Yuri web novel written by director Amemiya, except despite being a pair, they are not even in the same frame. The upturned faucet, also a reference to said web novel, where Ako inverts the tap to rinse her mouth out after eating spicy food, also gets a cut in. All of these are near each other as shots, but dissociated from each other, which, you know, the film acknowledges gay people exist, which it will not do again. While they try to figure out what's going on, Rex shows up and says that this world reminds him of the world he came from. Utsumi cottons to the part where this is a multiverse, which he says is a common series plot these days. I'm gonna zero in on that. Remember when I pointed out that the DVD Utsumi has carefully avoids saying the word Ultra on the cover and in any of the footage we see? Here that is again, where in the original show he'd almost certainly have said Ultra Series.
If only this were the Ultra Series, then the...
Now it's just series. Plot from shows. The Neon Genesis guys pitch the idea that the kaiju dimension is overlapping Tsuburaya. Yuta tries to visualize it with his hands, then Rika smashes the hands together to illustrate the overlapping. This act has a ton of charge for Yuta, but as yet no charge for her. Rex pitches the idea that more and more dimensions will overlap and the world will end. Then we cut to a batting cage out of nowhere. Utsumi's screwing around, he talks a little with Haas, mentions the world might end before finals, and let's zoom in on this part. Haas completely sandbags the idea of the world ending, is completely uninterested in finals. I'm going to file this under inexplicable weird stuff, but I'm also going to start a new counter and retroactively add something to it. Haas activating on Fixer Beam earlier during the play rewriting segment, despite Namiko and Haas's complaints about realism, is also getting added to this counter. Utsumi watches Haas go with a big smile on his face, which, I respect, but now we see Chisei from hit 2021 anime Dyna Zenon. It seems like she's lost, but she's actually saying that he's lost, with the question of who he is open. Maybe it's Goldburn. Maybe Goldburn's going to be in my movie. As you might have guessed, we're getting the rest of the cast together. This also doubles as more feelings from Yuta, because right before Koyomi shows up in what is probably the funniest thing that happens all film, Yuta's sitting in the bath thinking about how if Rika is dating a university student, his world's already ended. Can we take a second here? Again, I know I keep poking holes every time Rika even comes up, but Rika is a second year in 3-year Japanese high school, and wasn't allegedly dating this university student during her first year. That would mean the supposed beginning of this relationship is somewhere between April, when second year started, and June, when the film starts. Japanese high school is 3 years. That means that by necessity, Rika would have started a relationship with an adult. Now, it's weird here that Yuta's concern is not Rika is in a sketchy situation, but what if no GF though here, right? Or if not weird, it at least kind of reflects poorly. You'd think that maybe the girl I'm into is being groomed by a college student would rank higher here. And I know that the easier answer to this is that this is a shonen anime that isn't going to talk about that kind of stuff, that...
Hey, kid. It ain't that kind of movie.
But,
Please? I really want to go see it.
The police get suspicious whenever I walk around with you, though.
It actually is that kind of movie, kind of. Once you introduce that high-resolution stuff about adult-child relationships, compensated dating, etc., where it's acknowledged that that's weird, you kinda can't put the bunny back in the box there. If Yuta is our leading man, and his heroism is meant to be what makes him attractive as a romantic lead, and similarly his romantic feelings are what are meant to undergird him as a heroic lead, where is the heroism about Rika? And one of the things here is, I know that this exact concept can be done more thoughtfully by this director, because... So, remember when I mentioned Ako and Maru-san, Akane's friends, and the web novel? In a uniform from a school I don't recognize, the aforementioned web novel by director Akira Amemiya, hosted on his Inferno Cop account on Shosetsuke ni Naro, a Japanese self-publishing website, Ako Furuma discovers while heading home that Maru-san, the object of her affections, is working at a sketchy establishment that caters to older men. This at first drives her into a crisis as she realizes that despite considering Maru-san her friend and wanting more out of that relationship than friendship, she doesn't actually know her that well. She then realizes that she herself is someone who judges people only by their looks and feels pretty significant guilt over it. It's also clear that this worries her a little in terms of Maru-san's safety, as her internal monologue notes that while playing shogi with 50-year-old creeps is a great job for Maru-san that fits in with her busy schedule, if she had known that Maru-san had an underground job catering to 50-year-old creeps, she would want to stop her from doing that. This is a much more nuanced and interesting reaction than that feel when no GF. Ako learns about her own toxic traits as well as a new side of Maru-san. If the movie were more like this, I would feel some more sympathy toward Yuta, a character who at this point feels like he's designed to be perfect except in ways that the target audience is not going to see as faults, despite them being really significant faults. Likewise, Rika, again, doesn't feel like a character whose inner life the movie is interested in depicting. Anyway, Rex gets back to the junk shop and discovers that all his old buddies are here, and this happens. Given all the things we've led up to here, I actually like this. I kind of think it makes Dynazenon worse, but I feel that way about most everything that happens in this film involving Rex or the Dynazenon cast at all. If we have to take those things as a given, it's fine. Rika's mom instantly interrupts it, and Rika monosyllabically ejects her from the scene. Between the two of them, they've completely killed the scene's momentum, and Yomogi and Rex agree that they have killed the momentum, so we're moving on. We get a little bit of recap for the newcomers and establish that they can't just go home. We get studio trigger food porn. Both instances of the food porn are... We also establish that Knight, Nidaime, and Goldberg are doing some other stuff. Rika again looks on in mostly mute annoyance at more people being in her house, and everything I said before about this intensifies, but I'm not going to go into that. What I am going to go into is something coming up in just a second. This makes me insane. We've had a lot of small things that feel weird in this film all over the place, but despite it being innocuous, I'm gonna just... At the end of Dynazenon, and notably not in the Dynazenon compilation movie, Neat hero Koyomi Yamanaka gets a job. He does so not necessarily on his own merits, but by reaching out to Arata Tachibana, his not-quite-ex's husband. Even though he doesn't necessarily like Arata, he's still willing to rely on him. Even though he's not really fully ready for it, he's still moving forward. But no, that apparently didn't happen. He's still looking. A lot of fans work up their own justifications for this, like he couldn't stand working with Arata, or he got fired, but that's not what we're told. We're told he's still job hunting. One offhand line, and poof. Koyomi's ending disappears, and most of the answers as to how both make him look kind of pathetic and don't actually match what we're told. He's recognizable as Koyomi, but it's kind of at the cost of him being a coherent character at all. He's the Koyomi you remember, but the Koyomi we ended the show on pointedly wasn't the Koyomi we remember, and that's kind of the point of how the show ended. Indeed, it ends it with Knight finding Salaryman Koyomi unrecognizable. So anyway, we're back for what is the, I think, most load-bearing conversation in the movie, so hold on to your asses and let's get back to it. Gridman asks about the stage play script. We get a dartboard, flower pot, and T-Rex figure that are all... And Yuta says he can't help with it because... And then Gridman asks a question I haven't seen anyone online take a serious look at, even though it's so important to what this movie is doing.
Yuta, 君の物語を。
ああ、でも俺はその当時の記憶ってないからな。
This back and forth here, Gridman asking about Yuta's story, Yuta saying he doesn't remember what happened, and Gridman's anguished little noise are... I know it sounds like this could be nothing, but, please trust me. I'm going somewhere with this. We cut to Rika drying her hair with the hairdryer that makes you get into leather and BDSM. Man, 1993 Gridman was a show. And she and Yume talk a tiny bit about the situation being difficult. and then about whether Yomugi and Yume are dating. Max showed up in a funny borrowed logo shirt. Yomugi can't sleep. We see the moon and it's yellow. Rex shows up in another borrowed logo shirt. And we get a really tender moment between Yomugi and Gauma that isn't interrupted by Rika and Rika's mom this time. That counter is starting to really kind of scare me. Like, I know I already remarked on how fast the 1993 references were coming, but when it was just opening the movie with that, I was like, okay. But now it's Fast and Furious, and the camera cannot stop doing it. We fade out and back in, and we see one of the former Class 1E kids holding a dirty magazine while standing over an illustration. But Layla's here. Hello, Layla. Anyway, we get a breather conversation that reminds us again that finals are coming up before we cut to Gridman expositing to the Dynazenon team about his deal and how even his name and form are temporary and borrowed from humans. It's implied that they've been at this for a bit. Yume is messing around with a toy and the adults bring in boxes of weapons for the only reason anything ever seems to happen in this film. Finally, we get a little forward momentum as Chise suggests going to their school for lack of anything better to do. We get a bit with everyone doing costume design, and we discover that literally no one can draw Gridman. Everyone's drawings are at least a little inaccurate, though Chise gets really close. While Utsumi's drawing, we spot a familiar yellow Ulfa knife. Now, while we all recognize this from 2018, it's originally from 1993. They wrap up design and complete another iteration of the script while holding a basketball for no right, dumb statement. Set up some music. If you would let me get a word in edgewise. Anyway, now they've added Dynazenon to the script of the stage play. As an aside, this has got to be a 4-hour stage play at minimum if it covers all of Gridman and Dynazenon, right? Utsumi mentions that he wrote the action segments, which are the best bits, and I know I've said this before, and I've kind of let it half skate, but I really have to drill in on this at this point. This seems so wrong for Utsumi at this point in time. 2018 ended on him regretting being the guy who was always pushing for things to be a fight. He and Rika had that argument over it. He started to feel guilty. Rika had to stop him from throwing a punch in a hospital. He felt bad about it. It feels, again, like with Koyomi, like with Rika, a bunch of that growth has been pulled back for some combination of recognizability and metatext, and it feels superficial in exactly the same way as the other characters really have started to feel superficial. Anyway, Yuta gathers up and pockets all the concept sketches despite not being in the class doing this, and goes to get ice cream with Rika. Rika suggests hitting up the nearest 7, which the subs translate as 7-Eleven, and whose signage we don't see despite that it's not 7-Eleven, and it's a fairly iconic shot in both Gridman and Dynazenon. This is now the third time minimum that the film has obliterated, in the medical sense of the term, ultra references that don't also somehow point to Gridman, which strikes me as weird for a film that loves doing Easter eggs so much. The moon is here, it's still yellow. So here we will get the closest thing to actual, on-camera development of the romance that we will get all movie. Rika asks Yuta if he's bothered about losing his 2 months, which could go interesting places, but Yuta's apparently just glad that he's closer to Rika now. We get a lingering shot of a suspiciously specific store layout, and then they start talking about the end of the world and how Rika doesn't want to be a kid forever. and how she at least wants to do the play, and invites Yuta. Then, well, let's rip off the Band-Aid. Virtually everything about this exchange feels skeevy. Yuta lying about how he came by the information that Rika was dating a university student feels skeevy. Yuta immediately blowing his cover is cute and kind of funny, but it weirds me out that Rika, who has pretty much never let someone get away with being a weirdo creep in 2018, lets him off. Yuta thinking it would be unsurprising for Rika to date an adult, and saying as much to her face is also weird. There's a bit that could be flirty here from Rika about Yuta being more likely to be dating someone older than she is, but Yuta misses it, and I don't think Rika's forward enough to make that kind of joke. Rika calls herself a kid in a kind of derogatory way where I might have used brat here if I was translating it. The whole thing feels off to me. Like, it's not that there's nothing here that could be conceived of as sweet, but a lot of what's going on feels uncomfortable and weird. It also sort of frames everything Rika's done up until now on camera, and even everything she is doing in this movie in that category of being a kid. By extension, the feelings she's felt up to now sort of retroactively become, to use a conceit appropriate for a film whose B-plot is a stage play, rehearsal for adulthood. Other people besides me have spilled better, smarter ink about Class S and the Japanese literary tradition of pseudo-romantic friendships between women that ultimately serve as rehearsal for heterosexual existence, which has now drifted so far from its initial purpose that it's become sort of a way to avoid sexually threatening otaku with the possibility a woman might not want them as a man. But I think this sort of framing of Rika is unkind and minimizing to her in exactly this way. Moon's blue. Rika looks at Yuta expectantly, waiting for him to get to his point. The moment blown, they head back. The next day we get another script draft, only this time Akane has been cut, and Rika's got this really, well, what do you think, sort of needy for approval tone about the script as they talk about it. Yuta asks Rika about the Akane cuts, and she, without so much as sounding a little upset, This is where I think the movie went from that new Colossus, I'm shaky on this but I'm gonna let you cook, to that young blood, okay, you've totally lost me point. Not because I think there's nothing to be done with the idea of Rika giving up on trying to convey Akane's story because it's not connecting, but because she's not even really allowed to express what would feel like an authentic feeling about it. Like it's... God, I promised myself I wasn't going to spend this entire video essay hating everything to do with Rika in this movie, but it's making it really hard, and a deep watch is making it harder. One, Gridman as a franchise is not incapable of showing feminine anguish. Like, obviously, we have these three. Rika wants to be with Akane forever, and Akane is the thing in the script that she wants to get across. Nevertheless, Rika's response to having Akane pushed out of her script is to talk about it with all the emotion of someone reporting a C+ on a final exam, after enthusiastically begging Yuta for validation about it. For this situation and presentation to add up, either, like, A, I have to be watching a different show that isn't Gridman for point number 1 to work, or I have to be watching a different character that isn't Rika for point B and C to work. So now I'm kind of in free fall, since my other attachment points are like Auntie, who isn't here, Akane, who also isn't here, Koyumi, whose hard-won development has been shot in a throwaway line and who is otherwise mostly here to be funny in a kind of pathetic way, and Yume, who only just showed up and hasn't really done anything that feels uniquely her either. If I'm 45 minutes into your movie and that's where I'm at about it, like...
We're all in big trouble.
I'm kinda lying, though. I can square it. It's just that what squares it is so undermining to the thesis of the movie and so unexamined that I sit somewhere between I doubt that's it, and if that is it, the movie is saying something that's inauthentic and kind of screwed up. To me, this is actually all pretty familiar. If all your friends are telling you to stop trying to express yourself and wildly enthusiastic when you diminish your sincerity, you might stop trying. And you might try to appeal to your other friends for affirmation that stopping trying is the right thing to do. What I'm saying is that this feels less like her suddenly being sort of weirdly bubbly and happy about something that it doesn't make sense for her to be that way about, or more into Yuta, and more like her developing a trauma disorder. Now, I know that while really into Gridman and really into everything going on here in this trauma psych diagram is a Venn diagram with some pretty significant overlap. It's not as much overlap as I, who is in the overlap of both of those Venn diagrams, would enjoy. So let's start up with some basics. What is traumatic invalidation? This handy definition from the Boston Child Study Center explains that traumatic invalidation occurs when an individual's environment repeatedly or intensely communicates that the individual's experiences, characteristics, or emotional reactions are unreasonable and or unacceptable. Invalidation can be especially traumatic when it comes from a significant person, group, or authority that the individual relies upon to meet their needs. Traumatic invalidation threatens an individual's understanding and acceptance of their own emotional experiences, and often leads to a state of pervasive insecurity. Now, if we actually look at this movie as Rika's experienced it up to now, she's been repeatedly told that her work on the class stage play, which is just her lived experiences in order, is unrealistic. She's been discouraged from using that work to express what she cares about, her grief over another woman. She's actively re-experiencing all the worst parts of the initial traumatic experience, thus far without even the one thing about that experience that was good. And all of this stuff, or at least the vast majority, is coming from 3 of her closest friends. Honestly, I think if your immediate reaction to that is you're overthinking it, you're kind of just not willing to evaluate that anything that isn't literally said out loud, which is going to kneecap you in a show that's very much about things that go unsaid. Anyway, let's get back. Whoa, what? What? Haas? Buddy? I know it feels like she's just weird girling, but let me cook, promise. Keep in mind, though, that Haas thinks it's more fun when there's chaos. So we cut to Yomugi and Yuta on the rooftop. This talk is kind of nice for a while, and the first time that Yuta's done something that I really want to cheer. He seems more worried about Rika's vision being bullied out of the script than Rika herself. But it ultimately just turns to you should ask her out, which nothing really new is gained by establishing Dynazenon happened and Yuta wants to date Rika. Dynazenon happened was already re-established in Rika's conversation with Yume and Yomugi's with Rex. And Yuta wants to date Rika has been one of the focuses of this film. Instead of exploring the tensions the work is presenting, we're mostly just recapitulating previous work, which is kind of how this movie goes. Finally, something with the adults. They're at a food fair. Rika's mom abruptly yanks Koyomi out really urgently. And I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow of this conversation, because it's just like a happy reunion between Galma and his princess, whose name, it turns out, is Hime. Hime. This whole Hokkaido Fair bit is a riff on one of the Dynazenon voice dramas, which in turn was a riff on one of the Gridman voice dramas. Rex is trying to turn this into a somber moment, but Hime is not really having it. The eye covering bit is, you guessed it, another 1993 Gridman reference. Most notably, though, we get the third of the 3 things that people are supposed to keep. Promises, love, and... This is decent. I don't mind this. It keys back into the Power of Finite Things from 2018 Gridman. It's solid. There's some tension between it and the rest of the film in ways I might or might not get into, but it's fine. It's thematically consonant enough that I don't hate it. The peanut gallery stuff from Koyumi and Rika's mom. Incidentally, her name is Orie. We get that from, I believe, a Blu-ray insert. Is kind of funny, but I think it's finally time for me to say what is putting me off this film. Even ahead of the Rika stuff. Ironically, I think it's the exact quality that a lot of people like about this film, and that's closure. Gauma's pursuit of Hime and his separation from her is one of the foundational bits of Dino-Zenon. Gauma's reborn in the modern era. He searches for the woman he was separated from. He's been separated from her because he's a kaiju user and she isn't. He does his best with the time he has remaining. He dies. He's transfigured into Dinorex. Gauma and Hime meeting solely to goof on each other and kill one of the other mysteries, the never-mentioned secret third thing, feels pointless outside of checking a box. If you found that recurrent motif of things left undone in Dino-Zenon, a motif carried through Kano, through Hime, through Inamoto, through the kaiju eugenicist functional suicide in a world without kaiju, compelling, that's gone now, and it's not even really gone in service of much of anything. I'm not the sort of person who thinks every scene needs to advance the plot, but when you have only movie runtime, you kind of need to walk and chew gum. Mike Schur, on the first episode of the podcast for The Good Place, outlined 6 criteria for every episode, and I think they're a great outline for every 20 minutes of film as well. Let's say we want to make these criteria on the screen a little more general. That might put us at something like, are we evoking our intended emotional reaction? Are the characters being developed? Does the segment fulfill the core purpose of the work? Is it compelling? Is it consistent with the long game? Are we making use of the premise? So we've already got the A, B, and C plots, the kaiju plot, the stage play, and the romance. And this really doesn't serve any of them. If you liked the sort of Ultraman Nexus-y, watch Ultraman Nexus, trauma core vibe of Dino-Zenon, this kind of rips out Dino-Zenon's beating heart and eats it for a little goofing. Some fan service, I guess? We've now got something that, yeah, I definitely have to grant that. Kind of? Whether this is development or undevelopment is kind of up to the viewer here. Sure. No, and that's kind of by design. This one, I don't really think so. The long game is kind of retroactively pulling itself apart now. Indeed, this is one of the many elements of the film that the director himself, according to a roundtable interview in the May 2023 edition of Megami Magazine, didn't want to do. While the person I asked about this interview last year has since then fallen off the face of the internet, I do still have my notes about the interview and was able to confirm most of them with a post from a Japanese message board. This is the first of at least 5 major elements of the film that hew against things set up in the previous works that director Amemiya mentioned being against his personal preference in that interview. I'll talk about the other 4 over the course of this essay as well. To be fair, oh, definitely, and more so than we know thus far. We'll get back to closure, because I need more than the movie is giving me at this point to really dig into that one. For now, let's just keep going. Yuta finds a script in the trash, and they explain that it's an old script from before finals. Yuta starts to twig to something weird here. As the conversation develops, we find out that everyone has kind of stopped caring about the plot of the movie, except for Yuta and Yomogi. Unfortunately, I still care about the plot of the movie. And now Rika doesn't mind having everyone in her house because it's Alexis! But it's really just Rika's dad in cosplay, as a callback to Akane's identical excuse for Alexis's presence during Bojack in 2018, as well as to Alexis's voice actor, also voicing Rika's dad in secondary content. Camera gets trippy. Haas voiceover before anyone else as things get really, really trippy. Now, I want to note that while I personally don't like this style of scene, I never really did vibe with the sloppy, actiony run bits like the one during Bojack. I personally just don't dig Kai Igarashi's art that much. He has a better sense of place than a lot of other animators who take this sort of approach. Jujutsu Kaisen, for instance, has a similar approach to some fights, but while this makes the emotions feel weighty, they also feel really detached from their environment. I think this is well executed, and if you do like that style of scene, it's great. I want to call attention to something though. In 2018, when we get this style of scene, everyone gets to run. Here, it's just Yuta. Again, I feel like one of the big themes of the previous few entries, that heroism isn't about what size you're capable of being, but about doing the kindnesses you can do, and knowing when to be big, when to be small, is sort of falling apart here. Utsumi feels like he can't do anything, Rika kicks him and tells him that his friend needs his help. Auntie tries to save Akane, he can't save her as Grid Knight, so he purposefully becomes small and dives through her mask. Gridman realizes he can't win in a straight fight against Alexis, so he focuses on doing what an acceptor does best and connecting hearts. Very few moments in Gridman as a franchise are both heroic and solitary. There's a reason that a combiner robot was the natural next step. So yeah, this one's weird for me. It may not be weird for you, but it really sticks out in a way that starts to put me in that Youngblood place of it feels like a Winter Henshin Hero movie, but it doesn't feel like Gridman. Yuta eats it down some stairs. Fade to black. Roll credits. Just kidding. Yuta talks to Yomugi and connects that not only is he missing time, he's missing pain. Remember when he said the volleyball didn't hurt? Yeah, his sense of pain is just broke now, and so is the whole world. And Ghost. To Ghost. And scene. We're at a good break point before the movie's hour-long dash to its finale, so now is as good a time to check in as we're gonna get. How are we doing? For my part, I think I've kinda slid from C to D. There's a lot of things I expect from a romantic lead that Yuta is just not executing on, and which, as we are heading out of the part of the film where the slice of life elements really matter, I don't think the film is going to challenge him on those. Rika speaks less and less each time she's in a group scene. The Dynazenon cast has been completely underwritten. At best, most of them, other than Rex, are a fun cameo, despite being really strong characters who were already crowded in their own shows. If anything, the Dynazenon cast needed more time to breathe than the Gridman cast, who, in 2018, all got their own spots. I'm not totally closed off to the film at this point, but I feel like it's doing fan service for people who weren't really interested in what 2018 or Dynazenon were trying to say. But again, this is not insurmountable. Lots of two-act films have a wobbly end of first act. Transitioning between the first and second acts of a film is really hard. Let's keep going. Finally, we get another kaiju fight. Domgiran. When I first watched this movie, I was pretty warm on this and thought it was the best kaiju fight in the film. That's still true, but where at first I thought it was an A among C's, now I'm kind of more inclined toward a B. I'm not totally immune to cool attacks, but I am kinda close to immune to cool attacks. This fight does have some very cool attacks, though. Yuta's back at Aya before everyone else, ready to fight. We get a little more of the Rika making anxious faces that passes for development for her in this movie, because she certainly can't be allowed to speak. Gridman gets beaten up for a while, and then... Grid Knight's here. Nidaime has a cool boat now. What I want to highlight here, though, is this. The subs say pass-a-route here, but pass-route is the term. This is another returning bit from 1993, which I'm actually not going to count as a reference this time. Because it's just, yeah, that's a technical term. This is the first time we've seen Grid Knight do it, but maybe more importantly, this suggests that he's coming from somewhere outside the space freely of his own volition. There is some weirdness to this of a totally different type from the weirdness we're going to see later, so... But also, the logo on Nidaime's new boat is... With Grid Knight here, suddenly everyone has the bright idea to sortie. Moon's red. I think the cats shown in Calibur's arrival are the ones that he had in one of the Gridman voice dramas. Anyway, we've got both combining forms up. This is cool. I don't really have any bad things to say about this fight, or really any good things to say about this fight. It's cheese, and you know what? Sometimes I'll just go to my fridge, open it, and cut 3 ounces of cheese off a block, and eat it like I'm a mouse nibbling at it repeatedly. It's kind of the same flavor of cheese as Mechagulgulus in 2018, where we aren't really here for tension, we're here to see the combiner forms, but it's the same combiner forms as in the Mechagulgulus fight, but now they have one new attack. I do like the weapon trade, though. We also get all 3 moons in frame at once, signifying that things are really weird, but I already completed the moon cycle in the reference counter, so we're going to ignore that for purposes of incrementing the counter. I just think it's neat. Everyone cheers, Rika once again gets no lines. A second Grid Knight shows up and stabs Gridman in the back with his hand. Gridman de-reses. Everyone else also de-reses except for the locals. Rika's about to ask what's going on, but is interrupted by the return of Yomogi, original non-adult Auntie, and original non-adult Nidaime. Just to get ahead of it, like, the knight that we just saw de-res, we will not see him again. That's the only contribution Dynazenon era Knight and Nidaime have to make in this movie, kind of. See ya, bye. If you want anything that, like, built on Knight's emotional experience of Dynazenon, sorry. We cut back to before this whole fight started, and we find out that Gridman is the one who needs saving, as well as the cause of all the problems. What? We get some exposition at the Auntie and Nidaime homeless park, where they blame Gridman Universe for the present situation. I also do. Now, the explanation here is pretty interesting, but it trades on a lot of stuff from 1993 Gridman that viewers might not know. More important, though, is that we get a big piece of the puzzle. Humans have the power to create. Gridman, by spending time with humans, also gained the power to create. By implication, Gridman spending time with humans made him more human. This is another of those things that was outside director Amemiya's preference spread. His personal take, set aside for this movie, for better or for worse, is that Giants of Light should sort of be beyond human foibles and flaws. Less like big men and more like, I don't know, angels, I guess? More toward the Avatar of Justice end of the spectrum. Let's get back to it. At some point, Gridman swallowed up this world. Moreover, he apparently made the Dynazenon world? The cast ultimately agrees that they don't get it and it doesn't matter. Nidaime talks about humans having the power to believe in fabrication and fictions, and that's what's able to make them grow. The other half of the equation is that someone is supposedly doing this to Gridman, making him make more worlds, and somehow closed the universe off to increase its entropy? There's some flashes of chaos stuff happening. The kaiju eugenicists are here dicking around. There's Kano. There's young Futaba. We're establishing that the world is broken. A lot of people take this as the dead being revived, but I'm going to point to Futaba here again and say that it's less dead being revived and more time is just unwound. Yuta is apparently immune to this because of the traces of Gridman in him, but Auntie couldn't reach him because the fixer beam kept the universe closed off until Yuta's strong will to date Rika made it possible to enter. I'm just going to note for the moment that I don't trust Nidaime entirely here. I'll get back to that. We've got kaiju again. This time it's Noradogma, a kaiju whose gimmick is that there are a lot of it. Insofar as this counts as a kaiju fight, I would say this is the weakest. The Noradogmas kind of exist as visual noise. But it does do something that drives me up the wall, which you'll see in a second. Actually, it does two things that drive me up the wall for what we'll call the same reason. Grid Knight still has access to kaiju anti-form. And moreover, when Anti runs out of transformation time, both of these for me feel like pure fan service, and I don't really mean that in a good way. In 2018, Anti's transformation into Grid Knight marks a fundamental change in how he relates to the world. A new name, a new purpose, while not disregarding the old. Akane moves him out of the category of kaiju, and he gains a new identity outside that self-concept, outside that purpose. Later, he does the same for her, telling her she isn't a kaiju. Now both Sky Auntie and Grid Knight are just kind of cool things Auntie can do. Again, meaning lost, exchange for admittedly a visually striking retreat, but it's like 30 seconds. Instance domination is kind of the same deal. Instance domination ceases to be a symbol of Yomogi's wavering attachment to reality and the temptation to live like the kaiju eugenicists, to secure freedom at the expense of others' feelings. No longer do we have a sense of that potential freedom rejected in favor of irreplaceable unfreedom, but just a thing he can do. Yomogi using instance domination again, for those keeping track, is thing number 3 that director Amemiya didn't personally prefer. Of those, I think this is the one where he dodges the bullet best. By isolating Yomogi by force from the rest of the cast, he puts Yomogi in a position where he can do it without it being catastrophic to his characterization. I still don't like it, but I can appreciate the effort put into getting into a position where he can use it without totally undermining the show. Anyway, all of this is in service of Yuta getting to access Flash with Gridman to smush him back into a normal size form. Supposedly, in the process, Yuta himself will be lost. Gridman is calling out to Yuta, Auntie can't get him there, he'll have to run the rest of the way on his own. We also get more Rika distress, and the only time Rika calls Yuta Yuta and not Hibiki-kun here, as he rushes toward what seems to be certain death. Well, you're still here after this long, so I'm going to assume that you're going to put up with this critique. If we had more warm scenes between Rika and Yuta, this might land as a sign of love better. As it is, it mostly couples with everything else as something that feels more like more fear of loss.
I just don't want any more friends to disappear. I don't want all of our good memories to disappear. And for me, to be the only one left who remembers.
The idea that most of what is doing the heavy lifting in the romance in this film is not development, but the steadily increasing threat of death or bodily harm to Yuta. This doesn't feel sweet. This feels more existentially nightmarish to me. Like, this is a girl who is having some real struggles, who is not getting meaningful support for any of them. It makes it difficult to feel this teenage sweet romance here that I'm supposed to be feeling when what I'm getting from the two of them feels less about that at all. It feels like Yuta is more about affirming his own existence, and the easiest way to do that is for him to confess his feelings like he was denied the chance to in 2018. And Rika is scared of losing anyone else and hasn't been able to resolve her feelings about Akane because she's being continuously invalidated. Part of the reason it's so frustrating is that not only are we getting, laboriously high-budget syncing, something that Studio Trigger spent 4 years baiting really, really hard, but what we're getting is just... It feels cruel to me, both in the context of the narrative and the context of the IP as a whole. I feel a lot of this throughout the movie regarding both Rika and Koyomi. It feels like part of the reason neither of them are allowed to talk that much, proportional to their roles, is that if they did, the movie would start falling apart a bit. Rika is put in situations that directly drive into her anxieties repeatedly and undo things from late in 2018, like the rest of the cast remembering the true order of events, mostly in the service of getting her and Yuta together. Koyomi is entirely sidelined, and the lines he does get are about either removing his personal change, hard-won as it was, from the end of Dana Zenon, or about getting him out of the frame so that other characters can have their moments. This is not really a movie that feels like it considers either of them to be characters with non-instrumental value. I think this is where the combination of detachment, anxiety, and disappointment really just gave way to honest-to-goodness unhappiness with the film for me personally. I identified this moment as a potential pain point when they showed it in the trailer, and it was worse than I anticipated, but somehow in a completely different way than I resigned myself to. It is paradoxically not that the movie has fawningly done too much with Yuta and Rika, and this is a culmination of a romantic build that I don't want to see, but more like the movie has done so little with Rika that I am left with no choice but to read it cynically. The good news is that this video essay is the 6th time through the movie, and I do have more nice things to say about spots and more interesting digressions to do, so let's get back to that. Just before I forget though, this staircase that gets blown up in the fight and the stairwell that one of the Noir Dogma parks at to make its one ranged attack in the entire film. Yuta runs by an electioneering vehicle, a moving truck, a steering wheel with an inbuilt keyboard console, a giant novelty clock, and some posters as he makes his way to the junk shop, and then just can't do it anymore, which, man, I'm pretty close myself, buddy. The guy who pulls up, this is like a true Gridman Sickos reference, because it's 1993's Naoto show as an adult because, he's an adult in real life. The bike, and indeed all his stuff, is just stuff the real actor owns. This is honestly kind of just funny to me, especially now that they're advertising adult Naoto as, a main character in promotional content for stuff related to this movie. But if you watch this movie and you are not a true Gridman sicko, it's just kind of why? Whom? Whomst? Yomogi is running out of juice. Bike Naoto does a bit that's a callback to 1993 Naoto. That one I am going to count separately. Yuta makes it to junk with the help of Rika's brother and goes to Access Flash. Access! And doesn't even make it through the word before being yanked out of reality. He wonders if he's dead, but apparently he has been yanked to a safe space outside his world by Akane Shinjo? Akane Shinjo real? Right here? So there's something I personally find weird about this shot coming up of Universe Fighter. It's a small logic problem in the film. I'm gonna note it, but only explain it once the underpinnings are there. But I'm not going to deep dive it yet. We'll keep going. Akane explains the Gridman Universe thing and says that this form is Gridman signaling to Yuta so Yuta can find him. Yuta now has to not only bring Gridman back to size, but hold him together so he doesn't break apart. Once Yuta does that, Akane intends to help using the scary thing in his hand. The containment program from the end of 2018. I'm going to give credit where it's due again. This is a really visually striking scene. The outlineless Yuta really powerfully emphasizes his 2D-ness across from 3D Akane's eye, which you may recognize from the start of the movie. He dives down through manga panels implied to be the other worlds created by Gridman and sourced from semi-official products like Gridman vs. Diaclone, Anthology, Hero and Archive novelizations, and is himself flipping between being colored in and manga outlined as he cries for Gridman. He grasps the soda marble and awakens the inside junk space that we see in both 1993 and 2018, coming face to face with Gridman in the form that suits Yuta best, Primal Fighter. Gridman admits his guilt to Yuta. Yuta forgives him and says he's grateful for the experience, and that it's fine as long as Gridman had fun during the 2 months he stole. The drawings of Gridman fly out of Yuta's pocket, and Gridman merges with them. Now, this is one of my favorite scenes in the film. It's well shot, the visual metaphors are all great. Unfortunately, they're almost identical to Shin Mazinger Zero vs. Ankoku Daishogun's late turn to the meta. Shin Mazinger Zero vs. Ankoku Daishogun, if you prefer Great General of Darkness, is a 2013 sequel to Shin Mazinger Zero that begins as a direct continuation from that already fairly meta manga, itself a reimagining of 1973's Mazinger Z, the first series to have a humanoid robot piloted from within by the protagonist. Like Gridman Universe vs. Ankoku Daishogun starts with a seeming escalation of unclear origin that gradually turns out to be the fault of Mazinger itself. Like Gridman Universe, it's got some weird fake-out NTR stuff going on. Like Gridman Universe, it eventually takes a turn into the hard metafictional. Where it differs, though, is that it's capable of being a little broader in its message. Gridman Universe's victory is that supposedly all Gridman, no matter how accurate or inaccurate, is still Gridman. Versus Ankoku Daishogun, however, takes the opposite tack. It's not simply that all of Mazinger is valid, it's that all mecha ultimately draw their lineage to Mazinger, and thus even a world without Mazinger, where Mazinger is forgotten, is still suffused with Photon Power's light. Conquering Mazinger from within Mazinger doesn't work. We open on trying to avert the crisis with Great Mazinger, and it just makes Mazinger Zero the sort of evil Mazin that will reduce all of this to zero, and by extension itself, stronger. Fiction builds on fiction. Not only is every Mazinger valid, Mazinger's light is carried in works like Mobile Suit Gundam, Combattler V, Voltes 5, Daitarn 3. This is the sort of story you can only really get away with telling when you've got something super foundational. Mazinger isn't the only one that could do it. I think like Ultraman, Kamen Rider, Sailor Moon, and Godzilla could probably get away with it within their own niches. Gundam might qualify. But to really land that bird, you've got to have some cultural cash that... So I love Gridman to death. It saved my life. It absolutely doesn't have that kind of thing going where it's that foundational. Probably did inspire Mega Man Battle Network, though. Like, the only way you could really get away with this kind of story in a self-contained way is if you followed up with like, oh, by the way, we're releasing the most permissive free IP use guidelines, shy of literal public domain on the planet, once this movie is out of theaters. You've got to really put your money where your mouth is to pull this thematic off as something else. And that's obviously, that's not happening. If anything, it's been kind of the opposite. The stretch between Gridman and Dynazenon was full of semi-official secondary creations. Sengoku Gridman, Another Load, Anthology, Hero and Archive, Dogma, He-Man Samurai, novelizations, which despite its name was not a novelization of the TV show, but a time loop side story set between episodes 8 and 9. Even Dynazenon had a handful of spin-off bits. In the 14 months since Gridman Universe, as of the verbalization of this script, we've gotten a tie-in novelization of the actual film. That's it. For a film that's just made its climax about how every Gridman is valid and lovable, no matter how much or how little it reflects the so-called genuine article, the joy of secondary creation seems to have evaporated entirely in favor of the sort of stuff that comes across as creatively authoritative. Model kits, statues, acrylic stands. Wouldn't this kind of thematic arc work better if it came alongside some of the really out there stuff, like Sengoku or Dogma? Okay, I'll get back to the film. With Gridman more stable, Akane can finally do her thing, and we get an instance domination and a big titty magical girl kaiju eugenesis transformation that also transforms Alexis. I'm gonna sidebar here and say I really like Alexis's presence in this movie. Alexis has always been someone who is happy to exposit about facts, but where before he would present them out of order to hurt and mislead, he hasn't really awakened to justice or anything. Akane has to force him to fight. He's doing his thing, just in a chill way. Alexis is probably the character who feels most like himself, in spite of, or perhaps because of, this change in his circumstances. Unlike a lot of the cast who feel very sanded down or altered despite similar circumstances, and that goes a long way for me. If everything met the quality bar of the first scene and Alexis's appearance here, I would have personally enjoyed this film a whole lot. On the other hand, Akane returning to the computer world was the fourth thing that director Amemiya personally didn't want to do. This one I, as an Akane fan, am mixed on. Seeing her again is nice, but the way she is used in this movie doesn't hit for me. It honestly kind of feels like I'm being treated like an infant having my favorite toy jingled in front of me when I'm starting to lose interest. I think a lot of latitude was given to people who felt that Akane wasn't good enough to deserve saving, people who, for the record, almost certainly missed the point of both 1993 and 2018. She's very perfect here, whereas I think even a heroic Akane needs to be a little bit of a struggle poster. Her moral center feels like it operates on what she cares about, but she's sort of been reduced to Tsutsuji Dai's strongest friend. All of the girls in this movie, Hime, Rika, Yume, and now Akane, Chisei is not in this film enough to count as a character at all, honestly, are reduced to what they can do to enable sweet moments for boys. And I find that really disappointing compared to how well explored they were in the previous entries. Anyway. They go on approach to the evil red orb and find the real villain of this movie, a giant flea from outer space. That's right, this is Mad Origin, our end boss, a byproduct of humanity's overproduction of kaiju. I wasn't aware that was the thing humans were doing in this setting. I thought that we only had two people actively creating kaiju, and then it was kind of passively happening in Dynazenon because of the Baroque Pearls. And in this movie's kaiju were all sourced from Gridman. Were we producing kaiju? Who was producing kaiju? Wait, what? Oh, right. He's voiced by the same guy as Takeshi's pre-Condigifer kaiju, Gilarus from 1993 Gridman, so we've bagged another one. Alexis explains that this thing isn't really conscious, just replicating human emotion as it brings chaos, and Gridman somehow brings order? The opposite? Mad Origin's design does undergird this. As I mentioned before, if you invert the colors, it's full-powered Gridman. Its huge suspenders and even bigger pants also call back to this iconic shot. The suitmation process used by kaiju movie greats like Toho, this film's distributor, and Tsuburaya, this film's IP licensor, which kind of makes it seem like this film is saying that Tsuburaya and Toho are exploiting Gridman to make chaos. This also makes the side effect of humanity's overproduction of kaiju thing make any sense. We're not talking about the in-universe concepts anymore, not really. We're talking about there being too much kaiju media? Too many hero shows? This is the big tension within Gridman Universe. It's a movie that feels executive and audience safe, where the visual storytelling around the thesis is that they could use less endless churn of media for executives, less annualized kaiju and mecha stuff, less constant yielding to the demands of fans for more and more and more. But also, doesn't this all seem familiar? A creature enthusiastic about chaos, who force-skipped the exams, who exploits the power of Gridman's fixer beam to create a superficially happy ending, who's been exerting a pressure on the story even as it gets stranger? Is Haas somehow an extension of Mad Origin in this movie? Is Mad Origin asserting its version of reality through everyone but Yuta and Yomogi? There's no obvious answer here or anything. Just think about it for a while. The parallel is really loud and really specific, and the colors added to Haas's design also are similar to those of Mad Origin. There's no real answer here, though. I'm just pointing it out because it's in my head, so now it's in yours too. Anyway, Alexis and Akane get one good hit in, which somehow solves the problem, and lets Gridman finish shrinking back down from being Gridman Universe to being Gridman Universe Fighter. The opener of Gridman's fight with Mad Origin kinda bugs me. Like, I get that it's hype, but when you're staging a fight with your end boss, it feels like there should be some struggle. Most kaiju and mecha stuff is fundamentally descended from pro wrestling, and in pro wrestling we call this selling. The idea is that if you want your audience to buy that this is a difficult fight, you have to sell them the idea that there's a genuine struggle here. Let's take, for example, this wrestling match between The Undertaker, our heel or bad guy, and enormously tall evil zombie, and The Rock, our babyface or good guy, who you may recognize from any number of Hollywood movies in 2000. Now, this match has a third party come in and beat both of them at the end, but don't worry about that, we're going to look at the opener. Do you see how much offense The Undertaker gets to open the fight with? This is going to be like 2 solid minutes of him beating on The Rock. If we want The Rock to look good for winning this fight, which he was about to when the interference happened at the end of the match, so the thesis statement is still that The Rock can overcome The Undertaker has to look strong first. If your opponent looks good at the start, you look good at the end when you win. This is storytelling, not even 101, this is storytelling 1. This is the sort of fight pacing that goes back to, like, David and Goliath. Instead, Gridman does the opposite. Mad Origin, fresh off outright losing to Alexis and Akane, goes in for a kick with those legs that make up his most impressive body features, shouting that Gridman belongs to him, and not just nothing, but the counteroffensive immediately blasts him some 50,000 kilometers down to Earth. Now, if we're going for a short fight, or an immediate escalation to a second form, that's fine. We've got, 10 minutes left in the movie? Okay, sure. 3-minute final boss fight, some denouement. A half hour? 33 of God's own minutes? Where's the tension? That said, Mad Origin has put forth a thesis. He owns Gridman. The rest of our protagonist cast is doomed, though, until Alexis cuts in and saves them, but he's then immediately beaten down until Gridman shows up. Gridman explains everything. Yuta affirms that he's not dead. Yuta explains that this form is the Gridman that they all created. Is it? So right, a little while ago I said something about this bugged me, that there was a logic problem here. The logic problem starts here. The body features on this particular shot of Gridman Universe, as we really get a look at them, the particular shape of the trijuster, the circular nubs, the head shape, mark it as Universe Fighter. But when we see this form for the first time, Universe Fighter hasn't been made yet. If Gridman Universe Fighter is supposed to be the form they created, why is Gridman Universe essentially Universe Fighter? I don't usually do this kind of nitpicky stuff, but this feels so essential to the climax and its internal logic that it feels weird to let skate. I feel like if we're really doubling down on this thesis, that the Gridman everyone creates, accurate or otherwise, is stronger than a force that tries to control Gridman, shouldn't we be pretty circumspect about where the visuals of everyone's Gridman show up? Mad Origin keeps asserting that Gridman belongs to him, Yuta asserts back that no one owns Gridman, and Gridman adds that no one owns this universe. This continues not to add up for me. We've spent this whole movie up to this point establishing that Yuta and Gridman's relationship is singular and specific and necessary. I know that this isn't necessarily inherently ownership, but at the same time, Gridman's mutual exclusivity with Yuta feels like a weird cut in a film that is so obsessed with the back catalog, both because Gridman has had multiple other hosts, and because this was actually a thing in the 1990s Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad toys. In the 1990s, the original Gridman show was adapted for the West as Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad. While these never appeared in the show, as it was recycling footage from the original Gridman, the toy line gave us an interesting concept. Palette-swapped Gridman, or, well, Servo as he's called in America, pitched as other characters serving as Gridman's host. This concept even came back in promotional content for this film in the form of Next Mission Gridman, patterned after Akane's Kaiju Eugenesis outfit. Now, in fairness, that wasn't conceived until after the film had been released, but it was clearly on their minds. Why not let Universe Fighter truly be everyone's Gridman? We had that hanging at the end of 2018 with Utsumi asking for Gridman to dwell in him instead of Yuta next time. Why not lean into it? The repeated exclusivity of everything to do with Yuta and Gridman feels like it's asking us to accept different theses that contradict each other in different spots. Anyway, although this is easy to miss, Gridman seemingly has the power to passively fix all the buildings whenever he takes literally any action now. Despite having essentially totally free movement and not being pressured at all in this fight, Gridman feels suddenly like he doesn't have enough power to protect everyone else, so Alexis suggests using what's in his head instead, and uses instant zap reaction on Gridman to bring back all of the worlds and, by extension, the Dynazenon cast. Everyone gets Dynazenon, and Small Auntie and Small Nidaime get synchronized to the Dynazenon versions of themselves? This is also on the undermining end of things for me. Seeing Knight and Dynazenon felt so good in large part because it showed that he'd grown so much from his experiences, that he'd continued to grow and change, that he too had developed the power of finite things. Now that too is seemingly undone. Knight is just Gridman's fanfic about Auntie in the same way that Galma is Gridman's fanfic about a cool mummy he saw one time, and now the supposedly original Auntie is forcibly synchronized to Gridman's idea of Auntie. Auntie goes from a character who was able to grow and change to a character who needed to be shown how to grow up, or even forced depending on how you read the scene. Nidaime has a proper big form with combat stats now. That's cool. Mad Origin claims that Gridman's memories are his memories too, and finally gets some credible offense. They realize they still need more offense, and Akane just kind of gives it to them by turning Chise's Sharpie drawing on her arm into an upgrade for Goldburn. This is actually also more or less a straight lift from Shin Mazinger Zero versus Ankoku Daishogun for the same reason. Needing things from outside of the causality of Mazinger to beat Mazinger. But where there, it's a love letter to everything in the genre that came after, and an affirmation that every mecha anime deserves love. Here, it's just big gold burn. We get yet another new Gridman form, Rogue Kaiser Gridman, and another new Grid Knight form, full-powered Grid Knight, as they essentially trade assist weapons, and then everyone spams finishers on the boss like it's Super Robot Wars. We do another back catalog reference to Ninja Slayer as Alexis gets eaten by Mad Origin. Because if everyone else gets to have a new combining form, so does Mad Origin. He does get a little more real offense finally, for at least a bit. Gridman's new plan is to blast Mad Origin with Fixer Beam while everyone else tries to blow him up. Rika is back to calling Yuta Hibiki-kun. Mad Origin eats all the beams, and the power of being created destroyed in the same place repeatedly weakens him to death. The movie points out that it's just like the erasing at the start, which I find kind of condescending to the audience, honestly. Like, you set up the theme at the beginning. Let the audience do a tiny bit of work in connecting the themes. Don't talk down to your audience. Mad Origin gets in a lockup with Grid Knight, asking him what an imitation Gridman could possibly do, and the answer is help Gridman win. Grid Knight loses, but in losing, he deals damage to Mad Origin by accident, which sets Gridman up to win because Gridman relies on his friends. He vaporizes Mad Origin. Now, I know that Alexis explained that Mad Origin isn't really sapient, just a mimic, but how does that actually differentiate Mad Origin from Anti? Gridman doesn't take the lives of those with hearts, but what is a heart? Why is a kaiju seed not a heart when it was sufficient for Anti? Is it because it bursts kaiju? Because, hearts do that too. I'm not satisfied with the internal logic here. I know Grid Knight said in Dynazenon that sometimes kaiju can trick you, and they don't really have hearts, but I don't know. It feels like Alexis's explanation is more to get the viewer to not think about the action, where Mad Origin has more expression than any other non-anti-kaiju. I feel like Gridman just blowing a dude away is unearned here. Speaking of anti, we get some cute moments from Grid Knight and the assist weapons that end with Grid Knight saying that he can't measure up to Gridman. Alexis crumbles to dust after acknowledging the value of a finite life, and then the assist weapons immediately say, oh, he's not really dead. Both of these are also depressing. After years of Grid Knight is the real deal, it's I'm no match for him. What could be a poignant ending for Alexis is immediately dumped on by the assist weapons. Does this movie want me to, feel something, or is it scared that I might in fact feel something? Knight and Akane talk and reconcile, and Knight expresses his gratitude for being given life. This really doubles down on the mother-son thing, which I think is really uncomfortable to assign to the 16-year-old, and also kind of, again, undermines... So one of the really interesting things going on with Gridman on the kaiju side is that it's very much just a depiction of an abusive household. Akane makes kaiju, but it's more like she wishes for them, and Alexis gives them life. What lonely child hasn't wished for a younger brother? When Auntie is added to the household, Akane vents her negative feelings down toward him. Both of them, though, are ultimately in Alexis's house. Akane is the golden child, given the best of everything, while Auntie is the scapegoat made to suffer whenever things are going wrong. When Akane stops doing what Alexis wants, Alexis flips the dynamic like any good narcissist parent, letting Auntie into Akane's room, letting him make kaiju, letting him essentially replace her. Now he's the golden child, and Akane feels upset and threatened, which ultimately shocks her back into compliance and gets her to start escalating her violence, making more kaiju, reasserting the normal order of the household. This is kind of gone, and indeed what it's gone in service of is essentially making Akane a teen mother. Weird decisions, couldn't be me. Utsumi asks Rika whether she's going to say anything to Akane, and Rika says that if she did, it'd all come out, so she's not going to. Akane does a little finger walk across her shoulder, like in the ending animation of 2018, and then disappears. Rika says there's no need to say anything after all, seeming relieved. Really? In a movie where almost all dialogue in trio or exposition scenes has been defaulted to Utsumi, Rika's climactic moment, her moment of catharsis with Akane, is saying nothing. In the series where unexpressed feelings become monsters, in the movie where the thesis seems to be express your feelings even if it won't matter, Rika says less. Rika says less. Rika says less. They did you so dirty, my girl. You know what? Now's as good a time as any to talk about this. Certainly we won't get a better one. If you really just consider this too much in the 3-hour video essay to hear a frustrated Yuriota out for a few minutes, skip ahead until the Dynazenon cast are on your screen. That's fine. This movie has no interest in a conversation between two women. The only time we get one is Yume asking for a charger cable and Rika asking if she's dating Yomogi. A nothing scene that doesn't move any of the movie's balls at all. I'm not even saying this as a Yuri fan necessarily. I just think that if you're going to have characters who your previous work was predicated on their relationship in the same room, they probably ought to have a substantial interaction instead of just underlining that they're not going to interact. I know other people have said that they feel like this treats that relationship with dignity, but to me, it feels like it comes from a fear of saying anything about what the relationship actually is. It's not friends, it's not lovers, it's not really goddess and priestess. We're not really allowed to inhabit this. It has to be treated as so big that it's beyond the scope of the film. So yeah, when people say that this movie respects their bond, I think that's bullshit. Creating this weird third category that isn't friendship and isn't love, and is so big that it doesn't fit on the page, yet so small that it's reduced to an armband and a gentle touch and a fixation to express and then move past to get out of the way before we move to what really matters most in Tsutsuji-dai, Yuta's feelings for Rika. And this is not uncommon in works with intense relationships between female characters, this not love, not friendship sort of special relationship. And honestly, I'm going to say it. The primary thing this sort of thing does is diminish the reality of LGBT attraction. It diffuses it into something safe and non-threatening, something that still allows space for a normal guy to feel validated by these fictional women. Heterosexual feelings are formalized and ritualized and explicit. This movie is literally about, I have to perform the heterosexual feelings ritual in its C-plot. Queer feelings are expressed in metaphor and synecdoche, made safe, made into some different thing. The gap between how gay and lesbian feelings are expressed in anything but the most, narrow market BL or Yuri stuff and the way strong friendships are in not that is essentially zero. The two are indistinguishable to a casual observer in a way that I personally think borders on malicious. And when you depict the characters getting straight up married in official art, at least have enough respect for your audience to give them an actual verbalized, I still want to be with you forever, please move on, that isn't couched in abstract visual metaphor. I would still dislike what we got for reasons that I will go into later that actually apply just as much in a work without any of this going on. We get some goodbyes. Rika is yet again totally silent while the other characters speak and gets ribbed a bit about her and Yuta not dating yet. Koyumi does the thing he already did in Dynazenon, asks someone else to get him a job, in this case Rex, and Rex takes the opportunity to rib him instead. Rex gives Yomogi a crab to settle his debt to Yomogi's mom. Yomogi... So, despite never having had that conveyed to him since Hime introduced this, Yomogi also knows the secret third thing, I guess. Speaking of Hime apparently left Rex a note with the crab encouraging him to stop dragging it out, where it is presumably most of his connections to his old life, including her, and he seems to take it to heart. Again, heterosexual feelings are formalized and ritualized and explicit. Gauma can be told explicitly to move on by someone he loved. Rika can't. And I was going to let this off here, but after the Universe stage show, I actually can't. The Universe stage show was a live event in early April, which I do not have footage of because I'm not willing to give Tsuburaya $38 American, and devotes roughly a quarter of its runtime to getting Gauma to confess to Hime. At this point, it's like, there's exactly one type of separation we're going to try to be consistent about, and it's between women. Anyway, cute footing from Yomogi and Yume. No notes, this is fine. I don't hate this. The Gridman Alliance and Gridman part again, but this time Yuta's keeping the Acceptor. The extent to which I find this screws with everything before and after it needs its own section. This is weird for Gridman, this is weird for Yuta, this is weird for Rika. This actually is even a little weird for Grid Knight as collateral damage. I will save this for a bit because it interlocks with everything after this as to why it's weird, but it being the case does help me make my case for that later thing, so we'll let it come up then. Rika and Utsumi commit to rewriting the script one more time after Gridman leaves from the place the last shot of 1993 Gridman happened. We cut to Akane, for whom the screen blinks out, and she goes back to picking up trash with her classmates, while we pan over to a sign. Cut at last to the school festival, where there's a dude in military uniform and a poster for Dungeon Meshi, as well as the exact login information for a computer owned by a 45-year-old woman who presumably is in a different world entirely. And finally we see Layla again as the performance goes on. We also have a girl wearing a bomb collar, as Rika watches with a mixed reaction, and Yuta finds the performance extremely funny. This also seems like it undermines something earlier in this film. Like, if Rika brought back in the emotional core that she wanted, shouldn't Yuta, who is painted as both the most interested in Rika and our emotional drama feelings understander by the hacker stage play, shouldn't he be moved by that core? Shouldn't he have a unique reaction rather than the group reaction that everyone else seems to have? Anyway, Yuta and Utsumi debrief, and Yuta says he's going to go do something else. He taps Rika on the shoulder and leads her outside, then to a slightly more secluded hallway with a discarded floppy disk and some signage for other events. They too debrief about the play, and Rika feels like no one got what she was trying to say, but gets some encouragement from Yuta about people laughing and having fun. Ultimately, she says she guesses it was worth it, and says she changed while writing the play and came to understand Yuta more. They do a little navigating of Yuta's missed chances, and he finally confesses. Rika sounds like she's going to reject him at first, which he, to his credit, seems to be ready to take like a champ. And then she doesn't, and explains that him missing all those chances gave her the chance to get to like him, while looking in the exact opposite direction and hiding behind her hair in her hand. She takes a step toward him, they both cringe, roll credits. Shot of Yomogi's family eating the crab, which Yomogi's mom thinks is mid. So, okay, remember the thing that I kicked down the road like 3 times over the course of the ending? We're gonna finally get back to that. From the terms of Gridman's departure onward, I'm actually kind of past upset and into legitimately uncomfortable with this movie. I think there may be some awareness of the pain point, which is why Yuta takes off the acceptor before confessing to Rika. But because that can be taken so many different ways, I'm going to call that an escape valve for a less critical reader rather than sufficient mitigation. If that escape valve works for you to address what I'm about to bring up, cool. If you're going to extend that kind of unearned credit, I have a restaurant I would like you to help me start. But cool. Much of what is so damaging to how Akane relates to the world in 2018 is that she is radically more powerful than everyone and thus feels an obligation to solve problems in her perfect city with the only tools she has, kaiju. A superficial read points to this being about learning to solve her own problems, but she's inclined to solve problems for other people using radically larger means as well. Our first example, after all, is not something that happens primarily to herself, but to Yuta. Just as Gridman accidentally temporarily deletes Yuta in his haste to save Akane, so too does Akane delete Tonkawa for Gridman's, or as she knows him at that point, Yuta's sake. Likewise, when her teacher bumps into her, initially she wants to delete him, but when it happens again to Yuta and Yuta receives the better treatment, she stops. She has this impulse to protect others, not just herself. It's just that she's so lonely, so smothered, and so exploited, and so disconnected from people who can approach these issues person to person instead of using the power of something large, that all she can do is, well, address problems like discourteousness and getting creeped on by university students with kaiju. What's between her and happiness in Tsuburaya is that because she's its creator, she relates to it on some level as its protector. It's why she has to leave. If such a burden isn't temporary, it corrodes. Having Yuta keep the acceptor then feels more like the setup for tragedy than a heartwarming moment. By Gridman's own internal logic, retaining such a responsibility indefinitely is too much. It's isolating. It hurts you. Even arguing that Gridman and Yuta bear this responsibility together doesn't seem to get this to pass muster for me, since Akane also had allies, however toxic they were. Indeed, by leaving this responsibility with Yuta, Gridman has kind of done him dirty. Incidentally, the last point in the Megami Magazine interview of things director Amemiya doesn't personally prefer that nevertheless made it into this movie is transforming heroes falling in love. I can't say for sure that my reasons for this sensibility match his, but when I was first talking with someone about this interview last May, I was briefly surprised and then ultimately not that surprised. I got that sort of sense from the way the work was approached. It's also one of the reasons I am inclined to believe the friction in the relationship is actually intended, and all that stuff I said about how Rika is increasing in dysfunction and displacing that onto feelings for Yuta is actually a pretty decent read of this film. We even see a little bit of this in the voice dramas. It's never spelled out explicitly, but after an onsen date that leaves the two of them separated for the duration, Rika's immediate questions turn to the acceptor and whether Yuta wears it while he's away from her. The implication seems fairly clear. Rika also thinks about this forever burden, and about the possibility of Yuta disappearing to go do hero stuff and getting killed without her even having a chance to say goodbye. It upsets her enough to ditch the date until Yuta calls Yomogi and Yume for relationship counseling. This relationship template, the powered man and the unpowered woman, is actually not super common in Tsuburaya properties. 1993 Gridman does play with it a little, but it's radically more common not to. It's notable too for this purpose that Naoto does not keep on as Gridman's host for this point. I don't think that's just because those writers are disinclined to write that kind of story either. I think there's an intuitive moral sense that this sort of differential is damaging to relationships. Again, 2018 hinges on this, and I'm more inclined to price that work's sensibility in than 1993 Gridman's when evaluating the universe. The original Ultraman plays around with this sort of thing a little bit, but I think it's more salient to look at 1967's Ultra 7 for a parallel case. Ultra 7 spends an okay amount of its runtime building up a sort of will they or won't they romantic tension between Dan Moroboshi, the human form of the titular Ultra 7, and Ann Yuri, one of his colleagues. In the final episode, she, closest to him, pursues him, finding him as he deliberates over whether to fight one last time as Ultra 7 and face near certain death. He reveals his identity as Ultra 7 to her, and she says she still accepts him as Dan. After a few cuts to other elements of the episode, he tells her that he has to return home to M78, whether or not he fights, and, over her pleading for him to stay, goes to face Pandan. There's no last kiss, no explicit acceptance of the love, just a departure toward that duty. When we leave the Ultra Guard behind, it's not about Dan and Anne's romance, but about the guilt of the Ultra Guard for needing to rely on Ultra 7, someone who is strong and kind and dutiful, so much that it may have killed him. 2018 acknowledges this tension near explicitly during Fixer Beam, but it casts Akane as Dan. The Gridman Alliance plays Anne to her Dan. The shimmering background of the Fixer Beam conversation is a direct lift from that cinematography. And this tension undergirds many other Giant Hero works. Ultraman Orb presents us with Guy Kurenai, a man who failed to protect the woman he was close to once, and lost a century to the ensuing depression. Kazuki Komon, a member of the Knight Raider squad and eventual host of the titular Ultra in Ultraman Nexus, discovers that his girlfriend has been killed and consumed by a Dark Ultra solely for getting close to him. Daigo Madoka, Ultraman Tiga's host, explicitly and completely gives up being Ultraman at the end to have a human life. And when he is drawn back to it in the follow-up movie, it immediately does massive damage to his relationship with Rena. This is not irreparable. They do get married after he again stops being Ultraman Tiga, but this is an acknowledged problem in the text. The duty of a giant of light and the warmth of a specific human romantic relationship are incompatible, and there's a moral reason for that. This isn't that Tsuburaya Giant Hero stuff needs to be this way because it's always been that way. It's because there's a moral sense of how you relate to other people and how you relate to power that is conveyed by these stories, which are ultimately children's stories. Mecha and tokusatsu works also often approach this from the other angle, more pointedly showing the negative effects rather than underlining their avoidance. Mitsuo Fukuda's 2014 mecha work, Cross-Ange, features Embryo, an antagonist whose core problem is that, while he might have had a good point about humanity at some point in the process, trying to be God and have women has turned him into a creepy incel. Gundam Seed, also by Mitsuo Fukuda, sees its protagonist put into this position on purpose by a girl who, knowing herself to be powerless, gets into that relationship to enjoy that protection. This relationship goes on to deal massive trauma, not only to both participants, but also to the next romantic relationship the protagonist has. Those issues take 5 in-character years, a second series, and a movie to untangle. And indeed, that untangling is sort of the fun part for me. Acknowledging that friction is good, actually. One of the things that takes me out of a romance quickly is what I'll call uncaptured externalities. Cases where we're presented with a strain point but no resolution, with no untangling. And I'll be honest, when I'm reading a straight romance in a shonen, which I do perhaps surprisingly often, I'm a big Yomoyume booster, I like Guy and Mikoto well enough. Gun Sword is predicated on heterosexuality and is maybe my favorite mecha anime if it's not Gridman. If there are a lot of uncaptured externalities regarding the strain of the relationship on the girl and not the guy, I'm out of it real fast because I'm super wired to all that stuff I just said. Giant heroes don't split between being giant heroes and dating because that duty requires them to keep secrets, be poor custodians of their lives, and otherwise violate the implicit agreements involved in a romantic relationship. Part of the reason Yomogi and Yume work so well is that they are almost always acting together, and the few times they aren't, it puts an obvious strain on Yomogi. Even when it comes to Rika and Akane, I need Akane to relate to the world like a normal girl and not a god for the relationship to work for me. I don't give Yuri stuff a free pass on this type of thing. This consistently takes me out of it, and here, where the uncaptured externalities are so loud and most other stuff by this studio, and indeed by this creative team, focuses so aggressively on the negative effects of those externalities, it really takes me out of it. I also think there's a discontinuity here. Both Yuta and Rika's arcs in this movie, insofar as a character essentially disallowed from having load-bearing lines outside of one-on-one scenes with Yuta has an arc, are about expressing yourself even if it might not work out. Yuta with Rika with the stage play. Rika ultimately expresses herself and it doesn't work out, no one understands her. Yuta expresses himself and is accepted, is understood, or at least that's what we're supposed to come out of this movie with. Doesn't this seem a little unfair? Rika bears strain beyond the typical expectations of the genre, whereas Yuta reaps rewards for ultimately genre-conventional action. Rika has to accept being misunderstood, Yuta has his feelings explicitly accepted. Moreover, I'd say that the strain-bearing Rika does, having her explicitly stated worst fears brought back again and again, having to bear memories that only she and I guess Utsumi now share, and the lack of understanding she faces for that is ultimately all in service of moving her into position to be Yuta's reward. After all, this implies that Rika would have rejected him if he'd confessed at any earlier point. This goes largely unacknowledged in the fandom, much like everything else about Rika having an inner life at all. Rika's sorrow about Yuta's lack of hesitation about throwing his life away serves exclusively to show us that her need for Yuta is becoming greater. Even her pain isn't really for her own sake. She is, like I said earlier, being treated like a pawn. Is this a cynical reading of the text? I mean, maybe, but consider. What if we didn't see the answer? If the point really was expressing your feelings regardless of how they're taken, why not have you to do a little less building up, ask outright, and then cut to credits? I would say that ambiguity would follow more from both Gridman and Dynazenon, and it would even be more in sync with the movie's own messaging. It fully loops in the B and C plots and lets them synchronize with the same message. It doesn't matter how you're received, just that you're true to yourself. The answer that Yuta receives doesn't matter, it's that he said it. So, speaking of the B and C plots, let's talk about the A plot. A lot of people have already spilled ink about Mad Origin coming out of nowhere, and I don't really care to do the same. I already voiced my primary objection to Mad Origin. Outside of that one, I don't really have any. I want to talk about Gridman. In a work of fiction, especially one with such a bounded scope as a movie has, you generally want your plots to reinforce each other's ideas. Ideally, each concept is something that you are reinforcing somewhere else or have already introduced. So we have the A plot, Kaiju, Gridman, and Mad Origin. Big themes, guilt and forgiveness, and something else going on maybe. We have the B plot of the stage play with Rika and Utsumi. Themes of fiction as closure and authentic expression. And we have the C plot, our romance, whose theme is authentic expression. Quibbles aside, the C plot is supporting the B plot's secondary theme. The climax of the B and C plots requires buying into each other's motifs for the emotions to work. The B plot should probably support the A plot's theme, but right now we don't really have that. So let's consider. What would make the B plot and the A plot sync up? Throughout the B plot, Rika is trying and struggling to get closure about Akane through the stage play. As many quibbles as I have with how this turns out, this makes sense. Getting closure you can't truly get by expressing it through fiction. What if Gridman's doing the same thing? Consider the possibility that this Tsujidai, the one we spend the film in, is Gridman's stage play, itself another Gridman Universe world creation, one that he created to work through his guilt about stealing Yuta's time. Suddenly, a lot of this stuff has an explanation. Yuta's drawn Gridman matches Gridman's drawn Gridman because this is a Yuta Gridman imagines, reflective of his own experiences. The Lonely Sneaker stage play, a play about someone who needed kindness to heal from guilt and trauma, drawn from Gridman's own experiences, becomes Gridman's subconscious extension into the world he created. It becomes his way of asking Yuta for the help he needs. The emotional resonance it has for Yuta is not then something that feels off in how he reacts to Rika's stage play, but feels correct in how he reacts to being part of Gridman's stage play. He needs Yuta, this Yuta that he may well have created, to save his soul. The world is so festooned with mementos of Gridman's past and so light on the Ultra Series references that were favored by Akane Shinjo because the Ultra Series isn't Gridman's nostalgic comfort. And I mean, you can justify that in other ways. You can say it's a side effect of being absorbed into Gridman Universe. But those things don't change back to being more like Akane's Tsujidai either afterward. We get one last barrage of those references even after Gridman departs. Gridman's What About Your Story Yuta also takes on a different cast. This is why I find that conversation so important. This Gridman within Gridman, this piece of him who reflects Gridman's consciousness but is unaware of the nature of the situation, demonstrates to us what Gridman cares about, possibly even more than friendship, which is telling Yuta's story. And like I said before, I don't entirely believe Nidaime's explanation of Tsujidai's presence here. Like, I, on an out-of-universe level, look at what's being said here, and I look at Nidaime and go, okay, cool, I don't buy it. Or maybe more pointedly, it feels like it contains lies of omission. Nidaime is always a bit of a weird case. Up to this point in the show, in the franchise even, she's been the exposition fairy, showing up to tell characters as well as viewers facts that will get them where they're going. But even then, Nidaime, as we see in Dynazenon, will lie by omission. We get some funny bits out of that, where the Dynazenon cast are like, it's not like you guys are kaiju, and Nidaime just perfectly sandbags that. But more simply, stop unambiguously trusting people in stories. You ever play Persona 5 Royal? In Persona 5 Royal, new character Sumire Yoshizawa says, over the course of several scenes, that her deceased sister was better than Sumire herself at everything but cooking, essentially. At the moment, the Megaten wiki page for her sister still treats that as simply objectively true. Why though? Why would you trust the self-report of a girl who's always had depression and now also has survivor's guilt on her analysis relative to the person she feels survivor's guilt over? While I know that I said before that characters don't truly have interiority, they do have traits that should inform how much or how little we trust them as narrators. If a character is telling you something and then essentially looks directly into the camera and goes, hey, did you know that you can believe stuff that's not true? And then keeps going, do I really want to believe them, or are they dropping me a hint that maybe I should be skeptical of even their explanation? There's an equally or maybe more plausible explanation for all of this, and it does exactly what I'm pointing out, linking the A-plot's themes to the B-plot. So anyway, y'all remember Garmix? Garnix is a kaiju introduced in episode 10 of Dynazenon titled, Which Memories Do You Regret? In this episode, a seemingly uncontrolled kaiju appears, drawing characters into a dreamlike world where they confront the regrets of their lives. Yomogi, the character who's been presented as having the most control over kaiju and possibly the fewest regrets, starts to break free of this dream, and over the course of the sequence, we see him clawing at the walls trying to get everyone else out. The retelling of breaking into this Tsutsujidai from Small Auntie's perspective has some really familiar visuals. So we have this visual motif, the CRT lines, trying to break through a glass screen, etc., attached to this concept of dealing with regrets. But there's something kind of weird about this. The characters we see in Garnix who see themselves both as that projection into the world and in their modern state, the characters who see their consciousness from both within and without, are the victims. It's not Yuta having the experience that Koyomi's experience with Garnix mirrors. It's not even Tsutsujidai as a whole that's having that. It's Gridman. It's not Yuta who needed the forceful intervention of an outsider to be removed from the scenario. It's Gridman. And likewise, Gridman is associated with both CRT lines and breaking glass, which allows for the simultaneous misdirection and unification of those motifs with the themes they represent. And I know that a lot of you are going to say that this undermines Yuta's forgiveness, if it isn't the Yuta of Akane's Tsuchidai, the Yuta that Gridman dwelled in. That if he didn't really experience those events that Gridman stole from him, he can't truly forgive Gridman. And one that kind of requires not buying into the themes of both this movie and 2018, but maybe more importantly, which of those events didn't this Yuta experience? Losing 2 months of his time? Almost getting killed due to his fusion with Gridman? Interrupting his confession to Rika? Thinking Rika's into older guys? Starting his adventure with an indelicate use of a... He's been hurt in all the same ways, so in what sense is this not real forgiveness? If this Yuta, manga panel among manga panels, can forgive Gridman, that's a fiction with an element of truth in it. That's a friendship Gridman can believe in, creator and creation, no different from Akane and Rika. If you believe that the relationship between Akane and Rika matters, this relationship must also necessarily matter. By experiencing humanity as a human, Gridman gained the power of creation. By experiencing humanity as a human, Gridman became more human. To escape his victimization and his guilt, he has to accept that. Accept change, accept his humanity. Having touched the power of a finite life, Gridman now has to truly embrace that humanity within himself to win. Gridman has to believe in fiction. It's not the first time either. Again, let's go back to Garnix. Garnix is all about things left undone and lack of closure. Every character in Dynazenon, save perhaps Yomogi, is consumed by regret, by something in their lives that they cannot revert, cannot simply put away, a thing left undone. Yume never formed a meaningful relationship with her sister, and as a result never understood why she died, and struggles with the possibility that her sister committed suicide. Galma has been flung 5,000 years into the future, seeking out a woman from his past who he never finds. Koyomi fumbles the bag, both literally and metaphorically, with a woman from when he was 15 or so years old, and never moves forward from it. Bit by bit, these characters learn to build new lives. Or, die unfulfilled and get sucked into a giant robot, but the important thing is that they never really get the run back. What they do get, though, is to look back at those moments as the people they are now. Rather than fighting the characters, Garnix draws them into these moments where their pasts went awry. But what they can't do, not really, is change those moments in the real world. This is a world where Kano Minami remains dead. This is a world where Koyomi saw something potentially life-changing and immediately ran away from it. This is a world where Gauma and his princess Hime remain separate, where he and the kaiju eugenicists he once fought alongside are slowly coming apart. In the world Dynazenon presents, closure is the realm of the imagination. The worlds we see within Garnix aren't real, at least not in the sense of being fully identified with the world outside of the kaiju. The Kano within Garnix may well just be Yume's best guesses and hopes after all she's learned. Maybe the truth of the matter was different. Maybe Kano really did commit suicide. But the truth that Yume finds in Garnix, whether real or not, is real enough for her. Wouldn't this be its own neat echo? A Gridman cross Dynazenon that combines both shows' themes in a compelling way? Gridman, overwhelmed by a world he can't navigate due to a humanity he was never made for, retreats into this fictional world and finds within it friendship and closure and the strength to move on. And I know what you're thinking. If true, why wouldn't they tell us that? I mean, one, it would undermine the film itself if it weren't asking you, the viewer, to believe in fiction. And two, movie guys lie to you about that shit all the time. Ever heard of Blazing Saddles? Blazing Saddles was a 1974 comedy western directed by Mel Brooks, a send-up of the then popular cowboy movie. When developing the title song for the film, they put out an ad looking for someone who sounds like Frankie Lane, the singer of the themes to hit western movies and TV shows like Gunfight at the OK Corral, 310 to Yuma, Rawhide, and Bullwhip. They got Frankie Lane. And how did they get him to put out the song that earned him and the film an Oscar nomination for Best Song?
He rode a blazing saddle, he wore a shining star. His job to offer battle to bad men near and far.
They didn't tell him it was a spoof. He delivered a performance so strong that today the song is played alongside other vocal themes from westerns at Disney's Frontierland. If he had known it was a spoof, he would never have given that performance. Sometimes having more facts is counterproductive to feelings. Sometimes you need fewer facts for the right emotional reaction. I've got more to say about that, and none of it directly supports the screening of this film, though, so I'll get back to it later. I've got one last piece of this, and that's Mad Origin. The film tells us with words that Mad Origin is this amalgamation of Chaosbringer, this byproduct of humanity's overproduction of kaiju, which, yes, is fine enough metatext about the fan demand for more product being toxic. But that's not what it's telling us visually, and it's not what it's telling us with Mad Origin's own dialogue. The kaiju that invert Gridman color schemes are drawn from Gridman. This one Nidaime shows us, and it does make internal sense with the logic of the franchise, so this part of Nidaime's explanation I am inclined to believe. Gridman has feelings he can't express, feelings you can't express become monsters. But Mad Origin also falls under that umbrella. Like the other kaiju, Mad Origin's name is another Gridoman near anagram. Gridmanogram? I don't... Mad Origin is also a Gridman inversion color scheme, in this case full-powered. What's more believable? That this ungirded explanation from Alexis Carib is unambiguously correct, or that Alexis, who is missing the information Nidaime has on the situation and about the kaiju spawn from Gridman, is misinterpreting the situation based on what he sees, a theme that is also seen repeatedly in the film. Just chew on it. Let yourself interpret instead of accepting the first explanation you're given. You've got a brain. Assess characters as narrators of their own lives, reliable or otherwise. Let's get into the wrap-up. I don't really want to be the type of YouTuber whose output is takedowns of films. Even if it's films I really, really don't personally like. My other stuff is video game guides for poor people. Ultimately, I want to be constructive. I already told you at the start that I didn't really like this film. Honestly, it's hard for me to be constructive about this movie, and I am shocked that I got through this project. Part of the reason I don't like it is because I'm generally not someone who shits on art, but I think it's really sincerely unambitious and weak in a way that demands some criticism, but whenever you criticize it, people show up in your Twitter mentions, tell you to shut up, tell you to stop ruining the good time of fans who have been waiting for supply for a long time. It's a lot. I think it's really a very safe tokusatsu movie in basically the exact ways that the SSSS titles were not. The elements that weren't get shuffled out physically in favor of stuff that actively undermines the film. I'm very far from the consensus on it. All things being equal, I think if you unambiguously take this film as in sequence with both of the previous Studio Trigger Gridman works, it makes them both much, much worse. Even among people who really, really like it, I've seen the sentiment that the film is fundamentally a piece that's mostly about really excitedly playing with your action figures and smashing them into each other while making meow psh, 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 noises. And I think that's largely true. I've described it as Cocomelon for weebs before. Actually, there might have been a few more words in that sentence that were much more mean-spirited. The characterization isn't very strong, especially Koyomi and Rika, as I have basically not shut up about all film. The Dynazenon characters disappear from the movie for a third of its runtime after taking a quarter of its runtime to show up. I'm a Rikani girl, and every new voice drama not only continues this business that I've described as less sweet and more, existentially nightmarish, but also repeatedly has Yuta be, honestly, a really bad boyfriend. And, I don't say that as a slam, because I have been both ends of that behavior. Koyomi has his ending reverted with no explanation, and then gets less screen time than some of the assist weapons. After making a point of everyone remembering the true sequence of events at the end of 2018, everyone immediately forgets again to enable Universe's plot. Tonkawa seems like she may be dead, a strange contradiction of this one-e volleyball reappearing after the early insistence that their class doesn't have anyone on the volleyball team, a sign that Fixer Beam may well have brought her back. A lot of the stuff I activated on in the series got mostly obliterated in this film in favor of some closure that I thought was unnecessary and which I didn't want to see. That being said, this video essay, this frankly unreasonable project, is me trying to give the film as much credit as possible. I want to believe not necessarily that it is good, but that there was thought put into its creation, that it is deserving of thoughtful critique. I really, really want to give it a fair shake. I want to believe it has more ambition than an annualized winter franchise movie. I want to think it's doing something. I want to believe that the A and B plot are in support of each other instead of just being excuses for their respective halves of the film. I want to believe that you can take lessons from one half of the movie and plug them into the other and get a coherent thematic statement. With all that said, if you think I'm wrong, you're free to fully discard it and treat this video essay as a fun exercise in catching the references and production trivia about this film. Certainly it's within the spirit of the film. After all, you had an experience and it moved you. So who's to say it matters if it's real? Now, when I was in journalism school, I was taught that any headline question can be answered with a no, and any who headline question can be answered with whoever or no one. But no, it's me. I say it matters. The answer to the question is inherently transformative. Whether we say yes or no opens us to new, multifaceted reads of the text. It leaves reads of previous texts that would contradict this one open. Let's talk about reads. I think in modern fandom there's this tendency, this urge, to approach all texts as if they have a single objective truth and we're mining that truth out of the text. Somewhat related to this is the impulse, and I think this is as much indulged by creators as demanded by fans, to gradually show us every term mentioned. Let's look at Blade Runner. In Blade Runner, Roy Batty delivers a banger monologue about the stuff he's seen right before his time runs out and he dies. This monologue is generally regarded as the best death scene in sci-fi, if not in film, period. So you know what, let's just play it. Whatever, let's run it.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.
And yeah, it rules. But let's take the time to consider why it rules. Batty tells us the things he's seen. Despite taking place in an age of space colonization, Blade Runner takes place on Earth. We don't have a great sense of the off-world colonies, and even in the novelizations, we know there are only a few of them. Part of what makes Batty's monologue work is that the shoulder of Orion, that's so far. What's the Tannhauser Gate? We don't know. We are here on Earth with Deckard. We have no context for Roy Batty's life, but seeing him face death makes us want that context so badly. What did he see? What did he know? What makes Batty's death tragic, despite him being the antagonist of the film, is that he has been given so little life, and despite that seen so much. And he is denied even the opportunity to share that experience with us. We're mourning not just Batty as a continuing existence, but Batty as an existence that has happened. We are mourning the full depth of his experience. Like he says, it is lost like tears in rain. We can't recapture those moments. We can't know what he knew. That has disappeared into the world beyond. If we come to know what the Tannhauser Gate is, if we see the battles taking place at Orion, the prior art is changed and not for the better. There's something lost there because now we don't lose those opportunities when we lose Batty. Now we know what he knew, and it becomes that much harder to mourn. That death becomes just an event in a movie. Gridman Universe is a movie that feels like it's got a real fear of this kind of ambiguity, even as it flirts with taking that ambiguity into itself. I think it might be better to say that it feeds the people who get anxious about ambiguity, that it wants to provide a safe, comforting answer to everything unanswered about either previous work. As if 2018 and Dine Xenon were showing us a landscape painting, and Universe is like,
all the way up to distant mountains, and if you've played our previous stuff, you know that mountain is not just a backdrop. You can walk all the way to the top of that mountain.
But sometimes there's just a cool mountain in the distance. Sometimes the mountain is meant to feel like an omen. Sometimes going to the mountain removes our ability to mourn the fact that the only person who ever climbed it died in our arms before he could tell us about the cool mountain. So I say to you, hypothetical Todd Howard-brained fiction reader,
seriously, take this bit of advice. If this is off the record, go, man, get the fuck out of them mountains.
We don't need to climb every mountain, define every term. Art isn't meant to be a dictation of objective facts from author to viewer with some secret second set of facts for really motivated fans. Says like 3 hours into a video essay substantially about the secret second set of facts. Or, hey, no, listen. In the end, though, that's the contradiction at the bottom of the page. The thing about Gridman Universe that doesn't add up. It's about asking you to believe in fiction, to be the only species that can believe in falsehoods, while at the same time removing all the need for you, the viewer, to believe things that aren't true. It's about how important it is to express yourself, while almost all of the load-bearing stuff in the movie is stuff the director openly admits he doesn't like, want to do, or find compelling. It's about how no one owns Gridman, even as it takes great pains to make Yuta Hibiki's relationship to Gridman singular, special, and eternal, going so far as to have Gridman's previous host show up, essentially to give Gridman away to Yuta like he's the father of the bride. I think it's a movie about two different things that is way too scared to commit to either of them, and those things end up actively dragging each other down. Does it want to be a warm fan service hug or a meditation on fiction? Is Mad Origin Gridman's reflection and a sign of his guilt? Or the viewer's reflection and the desperation to see more kaiju, not to see more art but consume more content? Can it really be said that we're encouraging a cycle of creation and destruction that defeats Mad Origin if we let Gridman Universe dictate how we read two prior works made without its existence in mind? The thing it asks of viewers who were interested in seeing cool kaiju fights is simple and easy. It doesn't challenge you. It doesn't say, actually, you should be a little more empathetic, a little more curious, a little kinder to the mentally ill women you meet on the internet, whose situations represent a world you'll never really know. It's just cool, here's everything you want on a silver platter. That's real now, and you can believe in it, and you have this document, this text that says, sure, believe in it forever. The thing it asks of viewers who genuinely engage with Gridman, who liked that Gauma's quest was an impossible one, or who found the tantalizing bits of, wait, is this reality in Dinah Zenon's voice dramas compelling, or who, yes, bought into the extremely homoerotically charged marketing and multiple on-camera acknowledgments of LGBT people in Rika or Akane-centric contexts in 2018, the thing that it asks those viewers is very different, and basically boils down to accept that the people who didn't really care about this beyond it being seasonal anime slop are ultimately more important than you. You specifically should care less, and your options are either to remove yourself from the narrative or accept that those people are more important than you, and if they liked it, you're irrelevant except insofar as you have made something for them. Finding mass market texts that don't just shovel out fan service and easy answers is hard. Engaging with them that way is harder in an age where any serious analysis gets you responses like who asked or yapmaxing. To me, that's bleak. And now I think, if you're still with me, you might say, why are you thinking this hard about it? And I gotta ask you, why aren't you thinking this hard about it? I think you're going through life with one hand tied behind your back if you don't take some time to look at the stuff you read and watch and play and go, does this work? Is this saying something the author didn't intend? Are there unexamined consequences to this happy ending? Is someone being let suffer in silence? If you can't ask those questions of your fiction, how can you ask them in reality? Gridman Universe asks us to look at how we relate to fiction. And I think if you aren't doing that in response to it, I don't think you got what it was trying to say. I made this video essay to try and answer that. And I still haven't found that answer. I believe in fiction less. Like, to the point it causes problems. I'm not part of the warm hug moment. So, I guess I'd ask you, if you made it to this point in the video by some miracle, be kinder to the people who never see themselves in the fiction, the people whose stories don't connect, the people for whom someone's smile is someone's sadness only ever goes one way, the people you will never get to know because their story is in the way of yours. Again, if you got anything out of the 5 or 7 or 12 or 30 or however many hours you gave Gridman, I think you kind of didn't get it if those people seem like an afterthought to you. That's Gridman Universe. Is there more I could talk about? Yeah, there is. We could talk about how I think Gridman creating Dynazenon is another half-truth, and Dynazenon relies on those things I mentioned that Gridman is too naive to notice. We could talk about how, if this movie's Tsuburaya is Gridman's fiction, a lot of the character wobbliness in Rika, Utsumi, and Koyomi actually starts to make more sense because of what they're missing. But how it's not Yuta who Gridman's confession of Yuta's love at the end of 2018 truly reflects on, but Gridman, I'm game for that. Because for all I just said, if I didn't love Gridman, if it hadn't changed my life, I wouldn't bother. But I think this project, I'll end it here for now. If I started, it'd all come out. I've had a lot of support making this video. People who served as sounding board, gave sound editing help, answered questions about video editing, read slices of my script, edited my script. People I've never even met whose work I'm using under Creative Commons license. This is a thank you to them. I'm nothing on my own. That's who I am.